Well, hi everyone, and welcome to today's workshop. This is the Resume Secrets online workshop. We are excited you're here. We're going to teach you all about how to create an amazing resume that attracts the attention of casting directors, agents, and anyone else in the industry that you'd like to attract the attention of. My name is Joel Mark Witt. I'm the producer of this workshop. I'm going to be introducing our host, Aaron Marcus. Aaron is America's premier acting and commercial modeling career coach. He's also a top-selling author and founder of HowToModel.com, one of Google's top-ranked acting and modeling career sites. Aaron has been full-time actor and commercial model for over 26 years. To date, he's been cast 1,186 times. You've seen Aaron in projects such as Burn After Reading, Law and Order: Criminal Intent, The West Wing, Crybaby, America's Most Wanted, Molson Beer, McDonald's, Kmart, A Model's Suggestion, HBO's The Wire, and even ads for Disney World. Aaron has also appeared in print ads throughout the United States, Europe, the Netherlands, and Asia. Aaron has written what many consider the most important book for commercial modeling, entitled How to Become a Successful Commercial Model, and it's now in its 5th edition. He also writes and publishes the Tear Sheet newsletter, a quarterly commercial modeling and acting newsletter. Aaron, welcome to today's workshop.
Hi, I am so happy to be here. I've got an incredible guest. His name is Sean Pratt. This guy does a lot of different things besides being an incredible actor, does a tremendous amount of voiceover work with books on tape. He also is a lecturer, does amazing classes. He's a master teacher, and he's also the author of an amazing new book called To Be or Wanna Be. And we'll talk about the book a little bit later. So, Sean, first of all, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thanks for having me, Aaron. Thank you.
Sure. So this is all about resumes. And I know that a lot of times people think that they have put together a great resume, but the reality is that quite often the resume really doesn't do what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to do. So let's just start from the very, very beginning, and maybe you can talk about what is the exact purpose of a resume.
Well, to start off with, when I have a class that I do on resumes, and one of the first big ideas I try to introduce the class to is the idea of form follows function. That if you're going to create something from scratch, the first thing you have to do is understand what is the function of this thing. What's it going to do? You know, whether it's let's say you want to design a new kind of coffee mug or an airplane or something. It's like, well, what is the object going to do? And that'll help you design it, and it creates its own form, right? Once I understand the function of the object. And the problem with actors' resumes, the very first, most fundamental problem, is that we were taught how to build a resume according to a business resume, right? The function of a business resume is to give the reader a breakdown of your credits, your work experience, your contact information, and your skills, okay? And it has a very certain definite form to it, right? And so as all young actors, or beginning actors I should say, you don't have to be young to get started, we are inadvertently taught that form because we think that's how an actor's resume should function, but it doesn't function that way. You know, if you and I, Aaron, were in business, if we were managers or, I don't know, selling real estate or scientists or whatever, there's a very specific way that we have laid our resume out, because it's meant to be a CV, right, a repository of all of our information. And an actor's resume doesn't function that way. So the first thing that I would like to tell your viewers is that an actor's resume is actually a piece of advertising. Now, what does that mean? That means that it's a selection of information from the actor in relation to the project they want to audition for, right? So when you begin to think of the resume as a piece of advertising, then you realize that you don't have to include tons and tons of material or information on there that doesn't relate to the possible job at hand. And while I'm thinking about it, I just wanted to mention that I have a YouTube channel that you can find a lot of videos on the resume itself. And in fact, as you and I are talking today, I might reference one of these videos, and you can find it online on YouTube at either Sean Pratt Presents or Sean Allen Pratt. You can find it either way. There's about 30 or 40 videos up there, and almost all of them, the vast majority, have to do with the resume. Because, Aaron, as you and I know, your picture and resume are the most fundamental piece of marketing and advertising that you have as an actor. And if you don't get those things right, then it's really hard to get the rest of it right, like postcards and networking and all that.
So maybe what we can do is kind of start off with some of the basics and talk about the physical aspects of a resume. So
Sure.
why don't we just start off with size? I mean, I know there are a lot of things in the industry that can vary. There are a lot of things that can be done many different ways, but a resume really doesn't fall into that category. It's a
Yeah.
very specific thing. So, maybe you can just quickly just talk about what is the exact size for a resume.
Oh, sure. Once again, unlike a business resume, the idea with a business resume is that over time it becomes a multi-page document, and that gives you more gravitas because you've got all this experience and skills and education. But an actor's resume has to fit onto one piece of paper. That's it, and it has to fit to the backside of the picture that you're presenting, right? So it has to be whatever you put on that has to be one piece of paper. Its physical size has to be 8 by 10 because your headshot is expected to be 8 by 10, not 8.5 by 11, or not even oversized by that, because as you and I well know, that if your photograph is not 8 by 10 and it sticks out from the pile, it's going to get stuck in the trash because it doesn't fit everything else. So your resume needs to be eventually on a piece of paper that's 8 by 10. Now, one of the things that I tell people when they're formatting their resume, they bring up a brand new doc, either in Word or a PDF or whatever, is to go into page setup, and then you can set the margins of the paper, all right? And what you should do, once again, there's a video on YouTube about how to do this, but you need to set the top at 0.03, the right-hand side at 0.07, the bottom at 1.0, and the left-hand side at 0.03. And the reason you're doing that is you're shifting the margins of the entire document up and to the left. So when you fill it up and then print it out, you can put it on a paper cutter and go chop chop, and suddenly it's 8 by 10 and all the margins look nice and pretty. Okay? And once again, there's a video on YouTube that goes into further information about that.
Now, are there specific font styles or sizes of the font that you would recommend?
Yes. There's two parts to that question. Let me answer both of them. The first has to do with font. For our purposes as performers, when we're reading this material, there's basically three fonts that we need to think about. The first is a script font, which is a kind of font that mimics human writing, and that is the worst font possible to use on your resume. Never, ever use a script-based font. Now, the next kind of font is one that's used as a default. Anytime we want to start typing a document, that's the Times New Roman, right? It's Times New Roman was the font created by the London Times around 1920, 1930 as a replacement for their older Times Roman font. And the style of font is called sans serif. And I'm sorry, it's called serif, excuse me. It's called serif font. And what a serif is are those little hanging down things off the edges of the actual letters themselves. If you take time to look at a Word doc and blow up the font, you'll see they have these little pointy things coming off the front and sides of the letters. Those are called serifs. All right. The reason that font is designed that way is a serif font is designed to be seen in a very small font size, like 10 or 9 or 8. And those little serifs help your eye take in the information. Now, while that's okay as a font, it's the generic one. And one of the things you got to remember about your resume is you need it to be somewhat individual, right? So it can replicate your marketing style, whatever that might be. So the best font to use is what's known as a sans serif font. And those are fonts like Helvetica, Arial, Tahoma, right? Nice big blocky fonts that are easy to read when they're 10, 12, 14, 16 and larger. Okay? So we're looking for a sans serif font to begin with. And as a little side note, once you pick the font you like, that should be the font you use on everything, all of your advertising, your actor business cards, your postcards, your website if you can, your letterhead, all of it. So it has a unity of design to it. It all looks the same. Now, you're also saying, though, about font size. You need to think of your resume as the layout as the front page of a newspaper. Okay. Now, if you imagine in your mind the front page of the Washington Post, if you unfold it, okay, the area at the very top, those first couple 2 or 3 inches, in that area where it says the Washington Post, that's known as the masthead. It identifies the paper, the contact information for the paper. It might give a stock quote, the weather for that day, and so on. That's analogous to your contact information as an actor, right? So what you're looking for in that sense is when you're replicating the size of the fonts on your resume, I always tell people, you want your name nice and big. What's the name of this newspaper? It's Sean Pratt. That's the name of this newspaper. But the newspaper analogy goes a little further. If we look at the front page of a newspaper, we open it up and look at the whole thing, we see that they're a combination of stories and photographs that have been laid out, right? And these stories have been judged the most important stories of the day. And they're designed to catch your eye, so you pick the paper up and buy it with your cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, but the paper itself doesn't come to us unfolded like that. It's folded at the newsstand. And so there's a couple of terms here in the newspaper industry they use. One is called the fold line, which is the middle of the newspaper, the horizontal line. And then you have above the fold and below the fold. Now, why is that important? Well, all those stories on the front page were deemed the most important stories of the day, but because the paper comes to us folded, everything above the fold was decided to be a little more important. Now, how does that work for us as a resume idea? If I'm going into audition for a casting director for a movie, I want all of my film and television experience above the fold. Now, I might put a little tiny bit of theater at the bottom along with my skills and education, but the emphasis of that resume for a film audition will be my film and TV credits, and they will lie above the fold. Likewise, if I'm going into audition for theater, it's just the reverse. I'm going to want to have my theater credits above the fold and then have my everything else below that. So I always, in my class, I had different kinds of resumes, and I asked them, what is this, theater resume or film resume? And it's easy to tell because it's above the fold line.
So basically, so you recommend then having various resumes depending on the audition that you're going on.
Yes, and it really begins, Aaron, with a concept that I teach, and once again, there's a video on it, called the master resume. And what this is I tell, and I'll tell your viewers, after you're done with this webinar, I want you to take the resume you have and cut and paste it into a new document. I want you to name that document My Master Resume. And then I want you to take the document and I want you to start going through and I want you to put every single thing you can possibly think of that relates to your career. Every play you've worked on, every commercial you've shot, every industrial you've done, every TV show or movie you've worked on, no matter how large or small, all of your education, not only, by the way, education related to your work as a performer, but, I don't know, are you a licensed EMT? Did you get a law degree, right? Do you have a teaching certificate? Everything you can possibly think of that not only relates directly to your performance, your work as an actor, but think outside the box as well, especially under education and skills and training. This document, hopefully, will then start to become a multiple-page document. Now, this resume you will never take to an audition. That's not the purpose of it. This becomes your CV. This is an archival resume that you will then use to refer to when you're building a resume for an audition. Now, the reason I say cut and paste your old resume in is because you've already taken the time to make all the columns, the layout work. So when you're cutting and pasting this information into a new document, it's already formatted for you. So it saves several steps.
Well,
so by having that...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, okay, I was just going to say, before we even get into finishing that, I think it would be helpful for people to know what are some of the things besides the credits, and actually I was going to talk about all the different categories that you could potentially have, but
Okay.
even just some of the statistics that you would have that would probably come even before any
Oh,
credits.
sure,
I
your
think we
contact
should,
information.
let people know about that.
Sure, your contact information and
Contact
stuff like that.
information is one.
Okay.
And while we're talking about contact information, um, how exactly, do you put that on the page? Do you want to give out your home phone number? Do you want to give out an address? Do you give out a social security number?
Yeah, excellent question. Let me tell you a little story, and this for your viewers. In 1990, when I first moved to New York, I was walking through Midtown Manhattan. And of course, it was much drier then than it is right now. Um, and I turned the corner, Midtown somewhere, and there was a parking lot. And off in the corner, this homeless man had spread a couple of blankets out, and he had gone dumpster diving, and it was selling things like, a fan and a chair and a toaster, stuff he'd found by, scavenging. And then off in the corner, stack of them about, I don't know, at least a foot high, going for a penny apiece, were pictures and resumes. Some casting office had just emptied their files from the old stuff, and there they were. And so the lesson there is you never know where your resume is going to end up. Okay? So yeah, let's talk about what the initial stuff that you would want to you would want to have on your resume as far as contact information and likewise. Think of it like a little checklist. So in that masthead area, like I talked about, the top of the resume, you would obviously have your name, right? Your stage name, if it's different. And if you have a complicated name, you might think of a clever way to help us pronounce it. If you've got like a friend of mine has a Polish name, and so underneath his name, underneath that, he's got a little phonetically way of saying it, or if it's French or something like that, just to help the reader not stumble through it. You would want to put any union affiliations if you have any, or like Equity or Screen Actors Guild and so on. But also it might be that you're a member of the Choreographers Guild or something. Those kinds of affiliations go up at the top. Next, you want your contact information. Now, you only want a few things of your contact information. You want your cell phone number, and if you don't have a cell phone number, then you'll have to have another number, right? But generally, just your cell, your email address, or your agent or manager's email address, depending on who's submitting you. And that also brings up a really important point about your email address. You need to have an email address that's just a derivation of your name. Mine is SeanPratt@Comcast.net. If I had an email address like drlovemonkey@AOL.com, how are you going to take me seriously as an actor?
Like it depends what kind of work you're trying to get.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. If I'm breaking into a certain genre of the industry, yeah, it's different. I had an actress once. Her email address was like Sassy Britches. I'm like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. We got to change that. So
actually, Sean, excuse me. I just wanted to jump in for 1 second because not everybody knows about this. For people who do not want to give out their personal cell phone number or even their personal home number, there's an incredible free service, and it's called Google Voice.
Yes, that's right.
What you can do is just go to google.com/voice, and you can actually get a free phone number. And what you will do is once you claim that number, you set it up so that anybody who calls that number will be forwarded to whatever phone you want it forwarded to, whether it's your cell phone number or your home number. Yep. And if you miss the phone call, the other thing that's pretty cool, it will come to you in a text format. So that way, if you don't want to give out your personal information, this is another way of doing it. And the other thing, when you were talking about, if you do have an agent and you are exclusively working with an agent, only your agent's contact information will be there. They will not want you to put your personal phone information or even email address because they want all the clients to go through them. But yeah, if either you are freelancing and you're trying to market on your own or you don't have any representation, then these would be great ways to do it. And I really like your idea too of just making that email address really straightforward. Maybe you can even have an email address that is set up specifically for work and for nothing else. You don't give it, you don't give it out for anything else.
Right, and because that's how people are going to remember you, by your name. It's not going to be, Sean will be a star someday Pratt. It's Sean Pratt, And I've had those, in my classes, as I'm sure you do too, when people sign up for our newsletters. Sometimes people have these cutesy little email addresses, and that might be fun for your mom to look at, or for you, but that's got to go away. It just needs to be your name. And if your name is John Smith, by the way, obviously that's been taken. So it might be John Smith 123 or John underscore, middle initial underscore Smith or something, but it needs to be your name because that's how you're remembered. And also that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And I was going to say that extends on to if you have a website address, okay. In this day and age, as a performer, you really should be. If you don't have one, eventually you should be going to one, and that means you need to go to GoDaddy.com as soon as possible and claim your web address. And once again, as much as possible, it needs to be just your name. SeanPratt.biz or .com or something like that. So that's how people will remember you if they're doing an online search. Because if you go to some of these pro talents or these agency things where it might be Sean123/AX1-21, no one's going to take time to type that in. It's never going to happen. So by having your website address be just your name, that'll fit easier on a business card and on the bottom of the resume. But you do not ever put your home address on that resume. Ladies, all right, for obvious reasons. And you would also never put your social security number on your resume. All right, those are two things you never do. In fact, I also don't even put I have a P.O. box. I don't even put it on that. I save it for a different kind of resume, which we can talk about a little later, called the actor stats resume, which is something a little different that every actor needs to have. We can talk about that in a little bit. But also, as an extension going on, you'll want some basic vitals. You'll want your height, your weight, your hair, and your eye color. Although nowadays with color photographs, your hair and eye color are pretty obvious. But your height and,
I'm sorry. I was just going to say, it is true in today's time period. Everybody does have a color headshot, for the most part, and that should be very obvious.
Yeah.
But I do find that sometimes, when it is listed there, at least that way they don't have to flip it back over again. In case they're trying to see it. So I think that would be okay to have. I don't think it's essential, but I think that's okay to have. But the other one that does come up for people sometimes is age range.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what your thoughts are about putting age range on the back of the resume.
I actually never do it unless I'm asked to. And here, it's interesting. I always thought, as an actor, I've always looked younger than I was. Okay, I'm 74, just in case you wanted to know.
You look great, by the way.
It's all the coffee I drink. It keeps me going. So, but the age range is a really odd thing. I always thought, well, I'm only as old as I look, and I'm only as old in relation to the other actors in the project. There was a show back in the 90s called, remember, Hollywood 90210, that sitcom, or not sitcom, it was a nighttime drama.
Sure.
And all those high school students, quote unquote, were 27. But that was okay because they were all 27. And so the visual aesthetic of that show was, this is what 18 looks like, right? So I never actually put my age range on unless I'm asked to. But I got an interesting bit of feedback from a casting director once why she asks for it. She wants to make sure that you understand, in a general sense, what you can play. Because if I walk into an audition, or you walk into an audition, and we say we can play 25, we have no clue about our age range, do we? We're not being honest about it with ourselves or with them. And never forget, I said that the resume is a piece of advertising, and that in all points here, everything we're talking about as far as layout and information, the information itself is making a promise, both explicit and implicit. The explicit promises of your picture and resume is, number one, that you look like your resume, or your picture rather, and that all the stuff on your resume is accurate, okay, and truthful, and that you can be called on at any moment to explain any part of that, and you'll know what you're talking about. Those are explicit promises. The implicit promises are things like, if you've done a lot of Shakespeare, I can imply that you know how to speak verse well. Or if I've seen you've done a lot of action movies, that implies that you're agile and that you have some kind of stunt experience even though you might not be certified for it. Those are implied promises. But everything on this resume is a promise of some kind. That if I call that number, I'm going to get you. That if you say you're 215 pounds, you really are 215 pounds. And that if if I ask for your age range and it says that you can play 35, that you really can look and play 35. So I don't put it on there. I leave it off.
Yeah, I do as well, and it's for very similar reasons. Kind of going back to the headshot itself.
Mm-hmm.
The headshot should be clean enough and clear enough
and current enough. And current enough.
Absolutely, which is essential, and that things haven't been retouched in ways that you can't make yourself look when you're actually going to an audition, so that people should be able to see exactly what your age range is simply by looking at your photo. And the other thing too is sometimes, and it's kind of weird, even though you might be able to play, let's just say a younger age, if they see a number that's older than that,
mm-hmm.
it might scare them off. Even though you look right for the part, they might go, well,
right.
I think he's really like a little bit too old for this. But if you don't put the actual number down, I think it can open up more doors. But actually, you touched on something that's so important, and that is you absolutely have to look like your photos. And so not only do they have to be current, but also you've got to make sure, because sometimes people like to play around with airbrushing, or just or actually nobody's doing airbrushing today, sorry, old time term, but just using different kinds of programs to change things around.
Photoshop, that's what the kids say these days. Photoshop.
Photoshop. Well, that is one of the programs that people do use. I use GIMP, but anyhow. But the point is, you've got to really make sure you look like your picture.
Oh, sure.
Just kind of, I'm sorry. Was there something else you wanted to mention about this? If not, there was something else that just had to do with the resume that I was going to ask you about.
Well, we're still dealing with the upper portion, the masthead area. The contact information.
Okay.
You also might, if you sing. You need to put, if you're going out for a lot of, depending, once again, you have to remember that everything on that resume, like I said, it's a selection of information. So if you're going to go in for, let's say you're auditioning for a whole season at a certain theater, and so they do one Shakespeare, one musical, one new play, one children's, they have a 5 or 6 show season. So if you also want to be considered for the musical, you need to put down your voice range, or the fact that you don't have a voice range, like I'm an actor who can sing a little, but also things like, are you an actor combatant? Right at the top. In other words, if they have Hamlet on the program, or Henry V or something like that, lots of swordplay, having that little piece of information right at the top is really useful. Okay.
Now, where exactly when you're saying on the top? Because normally people would put that in the special skills section. So where on the top would you physically put it?
Well, if I had to, when we get to, I'm not sure if I should talk about layout yet specifically. I tend to put all this information starting off, and I'll explain why a little later, maybe, or at some point. I put most of all of this contact information in the upper left-hand corner of the resume, and if people want to find out why, we'll mention it during the video, but there's a video I have on YouTube called the Gutenberg diagram, and explains why I put different elements of the resume in different corners.
So that's going to go under some of your statistics of height, weight, eye color, hair color.
Right, exactly. So in the upper left-hand corner, in order of, if you were to look at it from top to bottom, in that little chunk in the upper left-hand corner, your name, and it needs to be a nice big font, size 20 maybe, 22. Right under that, you'd probably put your union affiliations. Then immediately
after. Hey, Sean, so you don't center your name on the top of the page?
No.
And why is
that? Okay, well, I guess now is a good enough time to talk about the Gutenberg diagram. The Gutenberg diagram was invented by Herr Gutenberg, the man who first published the Bible as a printed object. He was a printer in Germany about 500 years ago. And what he discovered was that when you have page after page of text, which a resume pretty much is, if you want to pull the viewer's eye to different bits of information that you feel are important, if you put them into the corners of the page, it'll help it automatically pulls the viewer's eye to that spot. And I'll be giving some examples that you can have your viewers download, resumes they can take a look at, and also on the video it shows it as well. But basically, he discovered that the upper left-hand corner of a page, if you look at it, if you've ever seen a Gutenberg diagram, that first letter of each chapter of the Bible is very ornate and large, and it's always in the upper left-hand corner. And it's done that way to tell you, oh, this is a new chapter, because it's nice and colored and it's bright. Okay, so taking that idea, if you look at a piece of paper and you're looking at the corners of the paper, your resume, the upper left-hand corner is the most important corner because that's where our eye goes first. Why? Because we read a piece of paper or text from left to right, top to bottom. And when we scan a piece of paper very quickly, there's a thing at play here called reading gravity. So we start in the upper left-hand corner, very quickly work our way down to the lower right-hand corner when we just scan a page very quickly. So the second most important corner on your resume is actually the lower right-hand corner. And in that spot, I'll be talking about using the idea of using photographs in that corner to help pull the reader's eye down. The third most important corner of a resume is now the upper right-hand corner. And I'll talk about a little later what you might want to put in that corner. And the weakest corner of the entire resume is the lower left-hand corner. That's where your skills and stuff, your training and so on, get stuck just by a matter of where they fall on the page. So to go over that one more time, the strongest area of a resume, visually speaking, this is all graphics design now, is the upper left-hand corner. The second most important corner is the lower right-hand corner. The third most important corner is the upper right-hand corner. And the weakest spot on the entire page is the lower left-hand corner. And once again, the video shows this out step by step. So actually I don't, because when you look at a standard actor's resume, they put everything in the center, getting back to your question, and you leave those corners empty. And you could put something in there to help pull their eye to something that's important. So I always, anytime I work with anybody in my resume class or when I coach them privately and we're reworking their resume, the very first thing I do is take all their contact information, Aaron, and stick it into the upper left-hand corner. That's the very first thing I do. And then I play around with font size. So their name is the largest thing on there. And then, once again, just working down that little chunk, then we would have their union affiliations, followed by their contact information. That's phone number, email, web address. And then maybe their vitals, height, weight, hair, and eye color. And their voice or age range if it's been asked for. And then finally, and this is one last little bit that I would put in that area, especially if you're working in New York, LA, but also mainly in the DC market because of all the government work we do here, is if you have a security clearance. Okay? That's a really big thing in this market because if you're doing any kind of training films for the government, if you have a security clearance, either secret or top secret, you need that up there at the top because there's a number of videos, as you well know, Aaron, that that they can only hire actors who have that security clearance to work on, or even audition. If you don't have the clearance, you're not even going to get called in. So it's a really big, important thing if you are auditioning for a government video. Okay.
Actually, just to interrupt for 1 second, maybe you can explain a little bit more about what industrial films are. They're called industrial films, training films, or educational films. They're all the same thing, but would you just explain a little bit more specifically about what kinds of films they are and what they do?
Well, like you've just elaborated, the name pretty much says it all. It's a training film. So it might be that, that Aaron and I are doing a training film on management-employee relations around a new, healthcare plan that the company has. So they've made a training film where Aaron plays my boss, I'm the new employee, and he explains the specifics of this new healthcare or insurance plan. But it might be a training film for the Army about warfighting concepts or something. It might be a promotional film for the FBI to recruit new people into the agency. But also it can also be something through a company like Verizon or any other corporation you can think of where it can train an employee specifically for something they're trying to do, teach, say, sexual harassment awareness or something. So
Actually, I did one of those.
Yeah, I have too. Yeah, really. So,
Actually,
were you the harasser or the
just
harassee?
actually, just on a little side note, this was great. This is when sexual harassment, and not that sexual harassment is great, but what I'm trying to say is when sexual harassment was first really being discussed in the workplace,
Yep.
I got hired to do a training film for the Pentagon. And because everybody has to be very politically correct, I was the guy being harassed by all these beautiful women in the office. And so that was a
It
very
was a hell of a
interesting.
shoot. I'm sure it was misery.
It was,
Misery.
and the other thing too that a lot of people don't realize, if you're in one of these huge stores, whether it's Costco's or those kinds of places, sometimes you'll even see it's a different type of industrial film, but it still falls under that category. Where if you're walking through an aisle and there's somebody demonstrating how this cleaning product, does a great
Try
job
this
on your
today with
floors,
the handle, and that's you.
right?
Yeah, and or if you're in line at the bank and it's like, here's our brand new CD that you. Those are all considered under the rubric of industrial training films. And I have acting students in colleges. They ask me, how did I end up getting into TV and movies? And I said, I did about 100 training films, and someone paid me to learn how to work on camera because, as you know, Aaron, the structure of your shoot day is the same as making a movie. In other words, you're going to start with the master shot, then the medium shot, then the two shot, then the POV shots, and all that for that little slice of the video, and then you'll move to the next scene, and so on. And that's pretty much how a movie gets made, piece by piece. And so you learn how to pace yourself throughout the day. You learn how to play to the camera.
Memorize lines.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And so, I strongly recommend it, and also it pays very well. And I tell them, which would you rather do? Be, asking someone, do they want French fries with that, or working on a training film?
So you're saying that you would actually put the training film credit or industrial film credits in the upper left-hand corner?
No. Where all I would put in the upper left-hand corner as it relates to this is if I had a security clearance.
Okay. I'm sorry. Exactly.
That's fine. And like I said, your viewers can download a couple of sample resumes to see how the layout works. Okay, you'll have them for them to just to download. The idea, though, is in that upper left-hand corner is the most important information on the resume. Like I said, who am I? What unions do I'm involved in? Here's my contact information. Here's my vitals. Here's my voice and age range if they need it, and here's the security clearance. But once again, it's all about what am I auditioning for? If I'm going to audition for a Walt Disney movie, I'm not going to put down that I have a security clearance because it's not relevant. And if I'm going in to read for a play like a Tennessee Williams play, there's
Or
no
any
music
kind
in
of
it.
play.
Yeah, I'm not going to put down that I can sing because there's no music in it, right? So it's always about relevancy. It's about looking at what you're auditioning for, then going to your master resume and saying, oh, that's relevant, and that's relevant, and that's relevant. Everything from the content. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So basically, what you're going to do is you're going to store all these things, onto your hard drive, and then simply print it out as needed on demand.
Right. Cut and paste. You'll create ultimately you can have sort of a go-to resume for theater and a go-to resume for film eventually that you can just tweak around the edges. You can cut and paste different stuff into, which is, after you get the idea, that's pretty straightforward. You can take off this credit, add that credit, and you can keep the structure of it more or less the same. Okay? But you need to start with the master resume, and you need to start with filling up the corners. So maybe I should talk about what the other corners have. Does that sound like a thing I should do?
You know what? Right before you do that, and I mean, that is something I would like to do next. Something that people have asked me about is what kind of paper should they use? Should they use something that's, brightly colored, floral, something that's going to, stand out? What are your thoughts about the type of paper that you use to print all this information on?
Well, first of all, you got it correct. You should always use paper. You should never print your resume on the back of your photograph. And once again, there's a video on this specific topic, but let's go ahead and explore it. you want the reason why you don't want to print it on the back of your photograph is because most photo paper is plastic, okay, and the ink that you're using on your printer may or may not dry on that plastic. It might smear, okay, and this can be a real issue, especially if you're trying to print a photograph on your resume to show, and I'll talk about that in a bit, or use color, but even just black. If it doesn't dry, if it can be smeared, it's not any good. It's gonna. But there's a more important reason, and here's what it is. Let's just pretend I've got a notepad here. Okay, so let's just pretend that this is the photograph of me, and this is my resume. Okay, so I've printed it out, and I would print it out on brilliant white paper. Okay, as a general rule, nice bright white paper, and I would staple it. When I staple it to the resume, let's say this is me, so it's an up and down photograph like this. So I'd staple it 1, 2, and the third one on the bottom. So 3 staples. Now if it's a horizontal shot, right, so there's me, I would do it 1, 2, and 3. Same idea, okay? The reason being, let's go back to this setup, is if this is me here, and this is my resume, sometimes the director wants to make notes on the resume, but there might not be room, so he can pop that single staple at the bottom, and now he can write on the back side of the paper or on the back side of the photograph if he wants to. But there's something even more important here, okay? What it is after your audition and you leave the room, this is the photograph, this is the resume again, and if the director likes you, they can do this, and they can separate them. And then he hands the photograph to the casting director and says, put them on the wall, and turns to his assistant and says, give him a call. Because, as you know, when they're doing a casting, they have a wall in the casting office with the different names of the different characters and the actors who are being considered for those roles. And so your photograph ends up under the role of Bill or Mary or whatever. But now they've separated the picture from the resume, which is why you should always have your name on your photograph. But now they've separated them, and now that resume can be used by their assistant to give you a phone call, or the agent a phone call. So you should always print your resume on a piece of paper and staple it, don't glue it, staple it to the back of the resume so that they can separate it for that very reason, okay? So yeah, use brilliant white paper.
Excuse me, I was just going to jump in. There were 2 other reasons why I also am not so crazy about printing onto the back of a headshot. I've seen this a couple of times, not all the time, but a couple times I've actually seen some of the text from the resume bleed through, depending on the type of printing you're doing, and all of a sudden I'm looking at the person's picture and I'm seeing words coming through his forehead.
But they're backwards, so it's like the sign of the devil on their forehead, pretty much.
That's not a good look. And the other thing too is sometimes some people I've known have like printed 50 copies. They've gone to a printer or wherever they had their headshot printed, and they said, yeah, just print my resume onto the back. And they might have done 50, 75, 100 copies, and all of a sudden they've taken a class, they've done another job, they were in a theater piece, and they
it's not relevant.
Yeah, it's irrelevant now because you can't update the. So you're going to just throw out a lot of great headshots.
Right, exactly.
For all those reasons. Now, I tell you, the only, and I do like your idea of only having 1 staple in there so people can make notes. My only concern with that is I'm thinking that hopefully there's some space on your resume itself where if somebody does need to make a note, they can still do it. I was going to say, because typically I will staple all 4 corners, and I realize that in today's time, agents want fewer and fewer headshots and resumes because everybody's doing things with JPEGs, doing things online. They're not really storing 40, 50 headshots like they used to. But if they do store any, I mean, I have seen some situations where an agent might, pull out somebody's headshot and the resume just became unattached, became separated. And sometimes they don't even realize it if they're putting packages together. But it really is true. And, in today's time period, people are using fewer and fewer hard copies as opposed to years ago.
Right. And also, as if you are making those electronic submissions, by the way, you should label your resume, and it should say something like Sean Pratt Theater Resume, Sean Pratt film resume, right? And then you're of course also going to be submitting your photograph. And what you need to do with the photograph, I know we're talking about resumes, but just we're talking about it. Take your photograph and open it up in your picture manager. That's Microsoft Picture Manager, or Apple has the same kind of program. And there's an option where you can edit the photograph and you can compress it. So suddenly your 15 or 35 megabyte photograph is compressed to a couple of kilobytes, and that helps it email quicker. And also when they open it up, they don't just see like an eyeball, because the thing is enormous. Because and often really large files like that they won't go through. So you should always compress the photograph and then always relabel it so it doesn't say outside sweater shot or 1061352. It says, Sean Pratt, headshot number 1, or whatever. So that if the emails get separated, they can still find it easily. So yeah, I mean, the single staple on the bottom is just an option that I've found works easy for me. You can do 4 staples. It's no big deal. It's not the end of the world. But the key, though, Aaron, is that they do staple it, they print it out, and put it on the back of the resume. That's really important.
Okay, so we've gotten the physical aspects of what the resume should look like. So let's just start talking about some of the specifics. Let's just start off with theater.
Okay.
You're going to have, I'm assuming, 3 columns or 3 different categories within theater to list things. Maybe you can just talk about that a little bit.
Actually, I try to put it in 3 columns, but there should be at a minimum 4 pieces of information, sometimes 5. Now let me walk you across that. Okay.
Okay.
So you'll have your category, theater, nice bold, right? So in other words, so that just so you know that when I reformat a resume, the different categories, theater, film, industrials, commercials, whatever, let's say those fonts are 14. So the text underneath will be a 12. In fact, 12, maybe 11 is the smallest I will ever go on a resume. So as per line of information, what you've got here is the name of the play. That's the first column. Then you tab over, and then I need to know the name of the role. Now, if it's an established play like Hamlet, ever heard of that one? So they're going to know that what Polonius is, or Ophelia, or whatever. That's fine. But if it's a brand new play like, Me and My Coffee Mug, that was at the Fringe Festival, right? So, and you played Gus. Okay, well, who the heck is Gus? So next to Gus, what I advise people is to put a little dash and then give us the size of the role. Was it a principal, supporting, cameo, right? Let us know what the size of that role was, because we don't know that play. And this actually goes, we can use the same formula when talking about TV and film work. So that's the second column. The third column has 2 pieces of information too. It'll have the name of the theater, a slash, and then the name of the director. Now, why would you want to put the name of the director down? Well, if Aaron comes to me to audition for my play, Me and My Coffee Mug, whatever, and I look in his resume and I saw that he worked with Gus Johnson at some theater. I just made that name up. But let's say I know Gus. Well, that's important, because now I might say, oh, you worked with Gus. Or if Aaron has a great audition, I'll pick the phone up and call Gus. How was Aaron to work with? Was he a good guy? Was he a professional? So the more data points you have, and that's, like I said, 4 to 5 data points at a minimum, that will give us options as to what needs to be on that particular credit. And also there's a reason also for this too. Let's say let's use the same thing with Aaron auditioning for this play, and he did a play that was directed by Gus Johnson. Well, if Aaron was smart, he would put that credit on his resume, because if he's done his homework and he finds out that Gus Johnson directs at this theater, at my theater, I'll look down, like I said, once again, and see, oh, he's worked with Gus before. That's important. It's also important sometimes to put the theater down, because if you've worked at a theater several times, that says that you're not a jerk. Theaters very rarely hire back people who are jerks. So if you've worked at, if you're coming into audition for another theater in town, or even a theater out of town, but let's say you're based here in DC, and you want to audition for the Old Globe Theater and their Summer Stock Shakespeare Festival. If you can show in your resume that you've worked with several Shakespeare companies multiple times, what does that say about you? That means you're reliable, that you're professional, you're easy to work with, and they wanted you to come back. And that in and of itself, that makes a statement.
I've got a question, because you are much more involved in the theater world than I have been. Have you ever run into a situation, I certainly wouldn't want to mention any names of theaters, but
their initials are?
Well, no, not even so much that, but if you've worked at one particular theater and you listed the name of the theater as opposed to just the director, that perhaps there's another theater in that town who doesn't, look fondly upon people who've worked at a, whether it's a competing theater or...
I've been an actor since I was a child. I've done, I don't know, God knows how many plays, 70, 80 plays over my, I've never had that happen. And in fact, if that did happen to me, well, first of all, if it happened to me, I never knew about it.
Okay.
Right? That's the first thing. But I found that having that information has only helped me. And also, frankly, if I ran into a theater that behaved that way, I don't think I'd want to work with them. If they're going to be petty, like, oh, you've worked for the studio theater, we don't like the studio theater, well, you know what? I don't like you, and I don't want to work with you. That's really petty and small. So no, I personally think you should just dismiss that thought from your mind. You're just looking for data points.
Okay, and the other thing too is, let's say if somebody, let's say they're in college, they really haven't done a whole lot. They've done some school plays. Could they, could they go back to even high school plays? Would that be a legitimate thing to do? They did it.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things I talk about, once again, a video called The Problem with Actor Resumes, is that we overfill our resumes because we want to validate our existence as an actor. So we put everything we've ever done, and by overfilling the resume, we make it unreadable. So how do you winnow that stuff down? Well, you create the master resume first off. But if you're just starting out, I tell college and beginning actors, I'm like, you and me and Meryl Streep and Denzel Washington all have something in common. When we started out, we had zero experience, and we build off of that. So, I coach people who want to get back or who want to start the business, and they're in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and they've only done, they did theater back in high school and college and maybe a little bit here and there, and they feel like they can't put it down. I'm like, no. Just go ahead and put it down, and that's where you're at. That's okay. At least you have some experience. But over time, you're going to want to take off certain kinds of roles, and these are the ones on a quick little primer in that. You need to. I would never put down a role on a resume that I'm too young or too old to play again. In other words, I always felt sorry in college for those actors who always played grandma and grandpa, because when they got out, if I want a grandma in my film or my theater, I'm going to go find a 65-year, 75-year-old woman. And so that put them at a disadvantage. Likewise, if I played Romeo at one time, I can't play Romeo anymore. I'm too old for that. So putting him down on my resume isn't really relevant, except there's always a caveat. There's two caveats. The first caveat is, if that's really all the experience you've got in classical theater, okay, put it down, right? You've done something. So at the very least, you can show me that you've done at least a couple of Shakespeare plays, even though they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And by the way, you'll notice on that criteria of information, I didn't put down what year I did it. That's important. What year you did a play means nothing. It's about the role, and can you play it right now? Like I said, the first caveat to the don't ever put anything you're too old or young to play, the first caveat is, if that's all you got, that's all you got. Go with it, okay? Don't be ashamed. That's what you got. But the second thing is, if I played Romeo at one time and I got some kind of an award for it, all right, and let's say I'm submitting my resume for Shakespeare Company's season, and I don't have a ton of, I have some Shakespeare, and I'm too old to play Romeo now, or I'm auditioning for a theater's whole season that's got a little bit of everything. I might put the Romeo credit at the bottom of my theater listing, and then right under that credit, with a little asterisk, list the fact that I won, the Irene Ryan Best Actor award for, Oklahoma City or whatever. So if you've won an award for a certain role that you may not be able, maybe too young or old to play, the fact you won the award for it says something about you. It means your quality of performance was judged by a third party to be of a certain level of excellence. And that once again, that's an advertising. That's a selling point.
Just to kind of jump back to something we were talking about that I just thought of. Sometimes I've mentioned this to people who do list things from high school, and they're pretty young, they just don't have that much experience. Look, I always say you've got to be very honest in your resume, and I have heard of horror stories of people listing things that they never did because they figured, really, who's going to, especially if it was a play, they're going to, who would ever know? And I have heard of situations. Matter of fact, there was one specific one where somebody told me there was a casting director whose husband directed this particular play that this actor lied about, and he was auditioning for her, and she saw it on the resume, and she kind of went along, and she was saying, "Oh yeah, I heard the director was kind of nasty." This is her husband. And he's, going along in this conversation, and at one point she just turned to him and said, "Hey, look, I know you weren't in the play. You're going to leave my office. You're never coming back to audition for me again. And so, please don't lie on a resume." But what I was going to say,
it's not. That's not the lie that gets you, though. I mean, obviously, you shouldn't lie on your resume. I mean, that's a really egregious example. But the lie that gets you, here's the lies that get you. The lie that gets you is when you say, if everyone were to, if I were to, I'll keep picking on you because you're the host.
That's okay.
But if I put on my resume that I'm fluent in French when I really took it back in high school, that might be the tipping point of me getting a part. And if I arrive on set and they give me my lines and they're all in French, the minute I open my mouth, they're going to know I was lying. Or if I say that I can sword fight when I took maybe a class 5 years ago, and that's the basis for me getting the role of Laertes in Hamlet, and they do that big serious sword fight at the end. Well, now they got to spend all this extra time teaching me this stuff they thought I knew, and really this gets back to, remember I said, it's if your resume is a piece of advertising and you're making promises, you are in effect lying about something. That's called false advertising. So those really are the lies that come back to get you. I mean,
I'll tell you
I've never been around some. I mean, I know they happen from time to time, but it's those lies that are the worst.
Well, the two things around that, actually, the point that I was going to make, and then actually I do want to mention something about the being truthful about skills.
Mm-hmm.
But for somebody who doesn't have that much, and they did a play in high school, what I suggested was in that third column, instead of putting the name of your high school, I said just put the director's name.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine.
You did it, and that's what's important.
Well, once again, I think there's a caveat there. If you're 21 and starting out, go ahead. More high school. That's what I want. If I was 21, I said I played Cornelius Hackle in Hello Dolly, at Moore High School, and this was the director. Why? Because I'm 21. That's what I have to tell college or new actors, young actors. I'm like, look, you're only 21. They expect you to have high school credits and college credits. That's okay, But if you're 45, yeah, I mean that's fine too. You have to understand, as long as the information is accurate, whatever you put down, you get to decide what you control the message. Never forget that. You are the one controlling the message of what's on that resume, and as long as it's all truthful, right, and accurate, and by accurate also I mean like spelling. I heard a great story from a casting director about a guy who said on his resume he could speak 7 languages fluently. Unfortunately, he misspelled the word languages.
Well, he didn't say he could write in 7 languages.
Yeah, I guess that's right. He could just speak them. But having when I say accurate too, it's like always have another pair of eyes look over your information, because it's called a Bachelor of Arts degree, not a Bachelor of Farts degree. Okay, those things really count. All right, and I have seen that. That's a true story. But yeah, I mean, to me, to be egregious and say, well, yeah, didn't you see me play Hamlet off Broadway or whatever? That's not. I mean, that is over the top, and you will get busted. But it's the lie about those things.
I can tell you one of the ones that I had heard about was a woman who claimed that she could ride horses, And that's what she needed to be able to do in this
Perfect
commercial.
example. Perfect example.
And she figured, right, when she was a kid, she was at the fair and they put her on a horse. How hard is this going to be? And so, here they're renting a horse farm. They've got horses, they've got trainers. This is a huge production. And when they said, okay, look, why don't you just trot around a little bit, get comfortable, and then once you're ready, I want to see a gallop. I want to see you flying by me.
Right.
And all of a sudden, this woman who had never been on a horse before, except for once, this little pony ride, she went to get on the horse and she kind of looked up at the horse and realized they're big. They're huge animals. And she just freaked. And she would have gotten herself hurt trying to do a gallop. And, not only, well, she was fired immediately, but you could also lose, besides your reputation, you could also lose a tremendous amount of money because you lied. And now they're going to stop production.
Oh, yeah, don't for a minute.
Next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't for a minute think that little incident won't get back to your agent, your manager, or the casting person. It will. Because the producer's going to get on the phone.
In this particular situation, she was fired. She was fired. The agent released her, said she would never work with her again.
Right.
Because it also hurts the agent, too.
Well, it makes them look bad.
Somebody.
Yeah, it makes them. Well, it's funny you should bring up horseback riding. About 12 years ago, I did a movie called Gods and Generals, a Civil War movie. And when I went in for the audition, and I read first for the part, and then as we got closer and closer with the callbacks, Ron Maxwell said, "Do you ride horses?" And I said, "It's been a while, and I was very upfront. I said, "I haven't ridden one in a while, but if I get this part, if I have enough lead time, I'll take a refresher course at a horse farm here in Virginia, around the corner from where I live." And that's exactly what I did. I did a month-long intensive. So when we got to the set, and because I'm a really big guy, so I got the biggest darn horse they had, and I was huge. He was a monster. But I weigh 250 pounds. I'm 6'4", and so, I was very upfront with him about it. But I did tell him, you give me enough lead time, even if it's a week, I'll take a week long intensive, so I'll be up to speed. And that was enough to reassure him that I wasn't lying, and I didn't want to be hired and have that same kind of incident happen.
That's interesting. And on a little bit of a side note, it's hard to turn down jobs, but I've done that a couple of not that many times, but I've done that a couple times. One in particular, they said you look right for the part. They needed somebody who could do a Liverpool dialect, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
I could play with it a little bit, but I would embarrass myself.
You had that Dick Van Dyke accent going on from Mary Poppins going.
Right. And the point was, as difficult as it was to turn it down, it was much easier to do that than to show up on the set and embarrass myself and embarrass
it was
the
the
agent.
smart thing to. Yeah, it was savvy. It was a smart thing to do for your career, and that was just being good politically and business sense.
Now, so basically, so you're saying that, and I know I'm kind of jumping here a little bit, but you were saying also that along with the theater, you would actually do a very similar structure for film and TV of having.
Yeah. So you would start off with the name of the project, whatever that is, right? And if it's a TV show, in other words, like, let's say you're in CSI New York, okay? So it'd be CSI New York dash and the name of the show. That's the first column. So we know what that is. Second column is your name of your part, and then once again, how big was it? And I tell people, if you don't know, when you're on set working, ask the director or the screenwriter. How would you classify this role? Is this a guest starring role? Is it a starring role? Is it a supporting? What is it? And they'll tell you, because they deal with those kinds of terms all the time. So you'll have the name of your character, Bill dash supporting. Then you have the network or the production company, depending, right? You can have one or the other, / director, okay? So if you're doing something like the CSI thing, then that's a network. But if you're doing something more local, like an industrial, let's say that the project's, say an industrial training film, so you'd have the name of the program, your role, the size of it, who produced the, was it, 76 Words Media / so and so. So you would put the production company on that. But if it's a network show, you'd put the network down.
Now, what do you do about TV commercials?
TV commercials are they fall into this gray area because if you don't have a lot of experience, I was just working with an actress recently who she wants to do more theater, and her background's doing lots of TV commercials and industrials. So she's got all these commercials. And I said, well, we want to put some down just to show that you've done some work. Oh, and before I forget, when you're building your resume, let's do the theater example before I move on, or even commercials. Let's say you've got a ton of them. You've done 40 plays, but you only have room to put on 10 or 15. How do you let them know that you've done more? It's easy. After the word theater or commercial, go dash, and then 2 words, partial list. Okay? So they know that this is only a partial listing of all the theater work, and if they want to have more, they'll ask questions. Okay? So back to commercials. Commercials, once again, you're not going to submit those necessarily for a theater audition because they don't really care about that stuff. But if you're going into
it could even actually hurt you because sometimes it's not viewed upon in a
right. I mean, that's also being savvy. There are some each venue can get a little snobbish, frankly, about what they want to see. But if you're going into meet a casting director who primarily does training films and commercials, you want to put them down. So as far as listing them, you would put the name of the product or the company. If you had a specific name, or if you had a specific role, like were you a spokesperson? Were you a featured extra? Did you have a specific name, like Flo on Progressive, right? If you had a series of them, you could also say, let's say that I was, let's say I'm the Mayhem guy. That commercial, the Mayhem.
Absolutely.
He's done like.
Oh, I'm very, very envious every time I see Flo and the.
I know. I want to push him down the stairs. No, not really, folks. So you're the Mayhem guy, and you're putting that down. So you would say, whatever the insurance company is, and you can put a little parentheses and say, 25 commercials, spokesperson dash the name of or Mayhem dash spokesperson, and then you would put down the production company. And if you've had multiple directors, you just got to pick one. Okay, you have to make a choice because you don't have enough room on the line to put everything down. Okay, but once again, that's what the master resume is for, to take the time and go through all that, because you never know if you've done your homework. It may be that you find out that you're going to go in and read for a film and TV casting director, and it turns out that she's done some casting for Jane Smith, who's now doing movies. Well, Jane Smith got her start doing commercials, and guess what? 5 years ago, you did a commercial with Jane Smith. So you might actually just put that down under its own little category, Jane Smith, and you might highlight her name in red. So already walking in the door to read for this movie, a general call for this now big-time director named Jane Smith, you're telling them, I've already worked with her once. She's worked with me. You see, so that's why all those little data points are important. You're sending a message, because if I could have your viewers take one thing away, is that a great resume not only tells me what you've done as an actor, but it also tells me who you are as a type, and it tells me where you're going with your career. It does all three of those things at once, if it's well crafted.
I was just going to say, one thing, and I do like your idea of making that connection with the director.
Yeah.
A concern that I do have sometimes, and there are some situations where I think it's okay, of listing TV commercials, is because you can potentially run into conflicts. So if you did a TV commercial for a specific fast food restaurant and you list it on your resume, even though it might not be currently running, sometimes that's enough to get you dismissed and not even be brought in to read for a competing
and that's why it's
restaurant.
good. Yeah, and that's also why you want to if you have commercials as an line item, and maybe you may not even put anything underneath it.
I just put list available upon request.
Absolutely, that's it. That's exactly what I would say. List available on request.
And that
Because,
way, what the agent should ask you is, do you currently have any conflicts running? So
right.
even if you did something for a competing company, but it's no longer running, then you can say, no, I don't have anything currently running. And that's really what their main concern is. However, the one exception to the rule is for somebody who really doesn't have much to put on a resume,
Mhm.
and let's say they did one or two commercials, I think it is helpful to list it just so people can see you've had some experience.
Well, the way to get around that possible compete problem is, like I said, you should, unlike a business resume where you put your credits in reverse chronological order, on our resume, you're putting within each category, theater, film, television, you're putting your strongest credits at the top of each category. So under theater, Hamlet, Willy Loman, whatever, whatever you put out. The stronger ones down to the weaker ones. New category, strongest to weakest. New category, strongest to weakest. So if you're in that situation and you don't have very many credits and you've got a couple commercials, the way to get around that is you would list Coca-Cola, this was the name of the spot, and then you can put, what year was it done. In other words, this commercial aired 5 years ago. You're no longer involved. So in other words, you can take credit for the work, but you're also telling them it only ran, 2 or 3 years ago.
Or I guess, that's an interesting point. Or if you don't want to give away how long ago it was, you can also maybe just put, not currently running. Or,
yes, that's also perfectly, that's also perfect. But, not currently running takes up more space than just the year.
Yeah.
And when you actually get down to the nitty gritty of it, it really is about graphics design. The examples that your viewers can download and take a look at, every square inch of that resume has been thought through when I'm working with somebody. There's also, just as a little rule of thumb too that I use when I'm working with actors, is when you put all this information down, one of the last steps to do is to print out the resume and then hold it at arm's length. That's what I call the 3-foot test of readability. So you print out the resume, hold it at arm's length, and then without your glasses on, you can say, can I read this resume easily? Do I have to squint? And if you have to squint or really focus on it, you've got too much information and the fonts are too small. So some stuff has to go. And it's hard because, it just kills actors. And I understand. It's a sense of validation we have. But the example that I talk about in one of my videos, I think it's the Master Resume again, is that I received a postcard for a Ford, I think it's a Ford Explorer, or Ford Escape. It was the new hybrid. And on the front of the postcard was the picture of the car. And on the back side of the postcard were just 5 bullet points of information. It had this kind of engine, it got this kind of mileage, it had this kind of DVD player, and so on. Just 5. The company had taken the time to find out who they were sending it to, middle-class married guy with kids, and tailored those 5 points for me, which is what you do with a resume. Now, they could have sent me a big, thick catalog with all the specs on it with the same photograph on front, but I never would have been able to find that information because it would have been buried with around a lot of useless information, as far as I'm concerned, as the consumer. And those 5 bullet points were all they sent me, and it was enough. I took a test drive. So, when you're building that resume, if you hold it out at 3 feet and look at it and it's still too full, stuff's got to go off. I'm sorry. You got to make some decisions.
Now, how about as far as extra work goes? Because I can tell you, I've got a couple of different thoughts about whether that should be listed or not. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, once again, if you're just starting out and that's all you have, put it down. At least it tells them that you've worked on a set before, and if you've worked at the same casting office, or this, if you've done, right now here in the Washington, D.C. area, there's a TV show that Netflix is producing called House of Cards, and they've been here for months. Almost a year, for goodness sake, it feels like. And so if you've been called back repeatedly to do extra work on that, well, that says that, once again, they don't like to rehire jerks. That says even though you're just background, you're at least competent, you're professional, you're on time, so go ahead and put that down. But as soon as you start getting named or bigger credits, that should come off. Because you reach a point where if all you have is extra work, like it or not, the casting office or an agent or somebody might just think, oh, all they do is extra work, or that's all they're good for. Once again, you
And
control that information. Go ahead.
and the one other thing that you do have to be very careful of, if you are going to list the extra work,
Right.
don't try to fool anybody into thinking that you are anything but an extra. Because I've
Right.
seen that a lot where people, will say
Yeah.
bartender, teacher.
Or if you're a cop in the backs, the one I like is the one from Homicide when they were shooting that in Baltimore. They always had the stock. They would always come back to the police room where all the guys were, and there were a couple guys who never spoke a line the whole time. Never, they were just background, but they gave them a name badge, like Sergeant Johnson, and so they put on their resume, "I played Sergeant Johnson." No, you didn't. You were background, and they gave you a name tag. You were a policeman. That's it. You
Yeah,
were a nurse.
because the problem is, well, first of all, I just don't think it's a good way to run your business by being
No.
dishonest. But second of all, if somebody happens to question it and they find out that you really were not a day player, or it's not a co-starring role, it makes everything that might be honest on your resume not look legitimate.
Exactly. All it takes is
So
one thing.
yeah, so if you really don't have anything else and you put extra work on there, put extra. So at
Right.
least they know that you're being very honest with them, you're being upfront. Like you were saying, you've been on sets, you haven't done anything crazy, so that
Right.
they will keep inviting you back. And also, once you have more things to put on there, you're going to start dropping the extra work.
Right. I'd like to move on to some other things you might want to put on the resume too.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, so your performance work eventually will make up the body of the resume, right? Theater, film, television, commercials, industrials, whatever is appropriate. Then below that, you're going to put down your education and training. Now, once again, this is all what you end up putting on that resume um, is all about relevancy. So if you're going in to read for a Shakespeare Company season, the fact that you are a certified actor combatant, that you've done text study with somebody from the RSC, that you went to the British American Drama Academy,
Excuse
those
me,
are relevant.
what's the RSC?
The Royal Shakespeare Company. If I worked with Ben Benison for Movement and he's with the RSC, I'm training with people who do classical theater is what I'm trying to say. So once again, so you list your education and training, and it might be that you've had improv training or audition for the camera. Once again, it's all about what's relevant. What are you auditioning for? Then below that, you would want to put your skills and certifications. Now,
Actually, Sean, excuse me, before you get to the special skills, how do you list your education? Do you have that in 3 columns as well?
No, what I do is, you can list the year you graduated if you want to. To me, that's sort of irrelevant. What year you graduated? As long as you have the degree, you got the degree.
Yeah,
So
I personally don't like putting down dates.
Right, because then they're like, "Oh, you're from the Stone Age." I see. So that's how I feel, But so I would say, I have, for instance, I have a BFA in acting from the College of Santa Fe, New Mexico. That's exactly how I list it with colons and commas. That's, the below that, the fact that I went to the British American Drama Academy and I have what's called a certificate of completion. It was a semester abroad in a fall, semester abroad kind of thing. But we got a little, you completed the course. So I actually just listed it as a line item, okay? What the degree is, the name of it, and this is where you have to think outside the box. Let's say I'm going in to read for the role of a lawyer, and let's just say that I studied law, okay? I have a law degree. So I would say law degree from Georgetown University, whatever, blah, 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 blah. Why? Because if they're looking for someone to play a lawyer, wouldn't it be better to have an actor who was or is a lawyer? So
Now,
they understand.
Would you have that in a special skills section, or would you
Education and
place it
training.
under
Education and training.
I'm sorry, education and training. So you
Right.
wouldn't put it anywhere higher up for that particular audition.
No, and I'm glad you brought that up. I wouldn't. I would keep them within their own context of category. And what I would do is when I talk about, we're getting over into graphics design, but just as the newspaper, put those stories on there, they were the most important stories, you've decided to put the most important information on your resume. But there might be information on that resume, even in that context, that's even more important, most important. So the fact that they're looking for a lawyer, or yeah, let's say they're looking for a lawyer to play, I mean, an actor to play a lawyer, I should say. Well, I'll put the fact that I have my law degree under education, but then I'll go back and I'll highlight it in a red font. So now it pops off the page, right? Or the fact, let's go back to the theater thing. Let's say I'm going to audition for a theater company, and I know that Gus Johnson directs there. Well, I've worked with Gus 3 times over the last 15 years. So I will list those credits, but where his name is, I'll highlight his name in red so that information pops off the page. Just by doing one thing with color, I've made that information. It's all about ease of finding it, right? I've already made it easy. I've controlled the information they're going to look at. And now to help them one step further, the stuff I really want them to see and not miss, I'll put in red. And maybe even bold red. So
how about, let's say somebody took an on-camera class, on-camera acting class.
Okay.
So would you have that in the first column, on-camera acting class? Second column, would you put the
name of the teacher?
Name of the teacher,
and then if they're part of a studio. Right, so if they're a part of a studio, in other words, I took on-camera acting for TV commercials. That's the first column. Second column is the teacher, Mary Smith. Third column is that she works for, Ed Studios in New York. So yeah, I mean that's one structure for that kind of training.
Okay.
So that would, yeah. So I mix them. In other words, I would keep the education stuff together, and then the training stuff in its own little subcategory under the rubric of education and training.
So, but you're saying that would go under education, but below the possible, degreed kind of education.
I've always there's no hard and fast rule here. To me, education and training are almost synonymous. To me, education implies accreditation of some kind, and training implies taking a class. That's sort of the way that's what I teach. So if you have a degree, an associate's degree, a bachelor's, a master's, a certificate of completion, those are courses you've taken, courses of study, that in the end you have your sheepskin that says you did it.
And you would list that even if you were a engineering major or psychology major.
Well, if that's all you got, in other words, if you're an engineering major and you want to be an actor, yeah, go ahead and put it down. You know why? Because that means you've actually gone to college and you've had to work to that degree, and that it means you have a higher level of education than just a high school degree.
Okay, and then to move on to the special skills, because I think that's an area that people really don't focus on very much, and that could have a huge impact as to whether you get called in to read for a part or not. So for special skills, what are you thinking of when you're listing special skills?
Well, I can tell you what I'm not thinking of are things like cat juggling and, the fact that I can toot a melody or something. Don't put that stuff down. That makes you look, that's the same thing as having Dr. Lovemonkey at AOL.com. How can I take you, this is a business. You could do that cutesy stuff in high school and college. That stuff stops now. But if you've got a skill like, can you horseback ride? Are you an Olympic swimmer? Can you do you do archery? Can you drive a stick shift? Right? Do you have? And these are odd things too. But sorry.
If you're outside of New York, I mean, if you're living in New York, you might even put driver's license because so many people don't drive there.
Once again, it's all about relevancy, which is why the master resume is so important. Yeah,
I guess what it really boils down to is when you're listing special skills, if you try to put yourself in either the casting director, primarily the casting director's shoes, how can you make the casting director's life easier? So what kind of skills could you possibly have and list that could be used in a TV commercial, in a film, in any kind of project
Are you great
like
with
that?
Well, yeah, like are you great with children? Are you easy with animals? Once again, it's all about relevancy. Like the Civil War movie, one of the questions they asked us was, are you comfortable with firearms? Right? I didn't have to use one. I actually had to learn how to handle medical equipment, which is something they ran off and taught me. I actually had a guy teach me how to at least handle them correctly. Civil War era medical equipment. But if do you know how to load and fire a musket? Well, that might be relevant if you're doing a movie about, the Jamestown colony or something. It's always about relevancy. So you have to think about the skills you possess, in relation to, you just list them on the master resume, and then you think, well, let's see, they're casting this movie, and it takes place during this time, or these are, I think, are the requirements of it. So, I'm going in to read for a cop. Great. Okay. Well, maybe you've taken a class on actor combatant training. That's relevant, right, for stunts. Maybe you know how to handle firearms. That's relevant. Maybe you are a registered EMT. So you know how to, like, maybe there's a scene where a cop has to help a guy who's had a heart attack. You don't know, but you have to think, what am I reading for? Look at your skills and then put just those down.
Yeah, because I know, like, sometimes when people have said to me, or I've read it on the resume when I'm working with people, I can speak in public. I'm comfortable talking to large groups.
Right.
I'm good with,
Okay,
kids.
so you.
Well, I'm saying, I would say to them, well, you're an actor. You should be able to do these things. I mean, that's what you need to be able to do.
Yes and no. A lot of theater actors are really uncomfortable being a spokesperson because you're not hiding behind a character or a script. And so, as I know, you and I both done a lot of live convention work where we're the host or the representative of the corporation. And so we come out once an hour and do that 15-minute little, multimedia production. So under your skills and training, and of course this would also maybe go under your credits, and this is a different category we didn't even discuss. But if you're going in, for a casting office for industrials and training films, and that's part of what that resume may be, you might have a category called, live convention work or live industrial work, where you say, I was the spokesperson for these different corporations. And then under special skills, it might be, I have an affinity for talking with large crowds, or teaching workshop situations as a facilitator. But that's a really special skill.
I guess what I'm thinking of, though, is if you're auditioning for a part, and let's say this is the guy who's a motivational speaker,
right,
and he is talking to a large group in a room. Well, as an actor, I mean, that's something you should be able to do.
You'd be surprised.
Well, I'm not saying everybody can do it.
Right.
But, as an actor, I mean, if that's a part that you are really, going after, it's something you should do, which is different than at a live convention.
Right.
And that is a whole separate ballpark. But I'm talking about if you're cast as a character and your character talks, in front of a large group, I don't know, to me, it seems like that's something that you should be capable of doing if you're called upon doing it.
Well, yeah. And also, under special skills, like, are you adept at reading a teleprompter or doing ear prompter work? Are you comfortable in front of a live studio audience?
Actually, Sean, would you explain the ear prompter? And I know it's a little bit off topic, but since you brought it up, I just want to make sure everybody knows what an ear prompter is.
Well, we've all seen the teleprompter. I mean, if you've ever seen a politician or someone, those little glass panels that are off to the side, and what that is on the ground is a TV monitor that projects the text to that tilted piece of glass, so when you look at it, you can read the text. And when you're shooting an on-camera video where you're the host and you're looking straight into the camera, they've actually they've mounted that version of it in front of the lens, so you're just reading text. That's a teleprompter. An ear prompter is exactly what it sounds like, a little tiny thing that fits in your ear, and in your pocket or somewhere close by, you've got a transmitter that has your text, where you've spoken your text ahead of time, or have someone speak it to you, but usually it's you. And it's playing, and as you're hearing it, it's a really special skill. As you're hearing it, you're saying it as it's coming out. As you're listening to it, you're saying it almost simultaneously. It's a cheat. It's just a way. So if the shot is you're in the middle of a cornfield talking to a really long take, walking and talking, it allows you to do the take and not have to try to memorize scads of material, and also you're not trying to squint at a teleprompter 100 feet away. So,
I can tell you,
which I've had to do on occasion.
to be most helpful is either an on-camera narrator, and like you said, you know, it's just you and you are either walking and talking, or you just have, you know, 20 pages of script. That would be, you know, almost impossible. Or sometimes at conventions, like you were saying,
Oh
and
yeah.
you've got a lot of dialogue and you're doing it all day long, and so you
Yeah.
have this little earpiece, you know, in your, it kind of looks like a hearing aid.
Right.
And
Exactly.
but anyhow,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention that since you brought up the term, I just want to
Right.
make sure everybody knows what that
Well, then
means.
another possible category, once again, this is all about relevancy, is your teaching experience. For instance, let's say you're auditioning for a theater company, just a general audition, but you know that they have a teaching component where they take Shakespeare into classrooms. Uh, excuse me. Thought I turned that thing off. My apologies. That was my phone. So let's say you're auditioning for the season of a theater company, and you know that they've got a, you know, Shakespeare in the Schools component, and you want to not only be considered for the shows in the season, but it might be a tipping point that you've taught Shakespeare to students before, or you've done a school tour of some kind where teaching was a component, or that you have maybe a minor degree in, you might have a teaching degree, or that you've done summer workshops in theater for children. So your teaching component might be really relevant in that circumstance. So that's also one possible subcategory that can go down there, all depending.
That's interesting. And actually, I mean, the last thing I was just going to say about special skills, because I think you really explained it well. Sometimes you can have something that seems somewhat bizarre, but still put it into the special skills section. And the one thing that comes to mind for me is there was a woman who was taking one of my workshops, and I was looking at her resume, and she was telling me that she can contort her body in a way that she can actually fit into a suitcase. Now, I thought, well, you know what? Normally
We
I would
don't have
say
problems with air travel. There it is, right there.
she can sit in the upper head compartment.
That's right.
But the thing that I found intriguing about that for the resume, and I said, you know, you should definitely put that onto your resume, because sometimes I've seen in TV commercials, they need people who can do quirky things like that.
Yeah.
And
The watchword is always relevancy. You know.
And I think that's the key word. And so by having multiple resumes, you can always fine tune every piece of information to your particular audition, which I think that's something that's very unique, and that you teach. And I think it's a great idea of not trying to have this, one resume that you're trying to cram down everybody's throat, and
Right.
instead, you really dress it up and make it, the right kind of resume for the affair that you're going to.
Well, there's two other pieces that we haven't talked about that I feel that are unique to what I teach about the resume as well. Beyond they go along with the Gutenberg diagram. Would you like me to go ahead and talk about this?
Sure. Why don't we do that, and then we'll wind things up after that.
Okay. If you recall, we had those different corners, and in the strongest corner, which is the upper left-hand corner, that's your contact information. The second strongest corner is in that bottom right-hand corner, because that's where our eye goes when we read very quickly on a page, because of reading gravity. There's a concept in advertising, and in sociology they talk about it too. The concept is known as anchoring, and there's a video on it on my YouTube channel, because this will be a quick overview of it. Anchoring is something that we do with our brain where we take a small amount of information in and make an immediate judgment and reaction to that information based on a very small amount of information we're given. For instance, if this goes back to when we were cavemen, basically. So you're walking through the forest and you look over in the grass and you see something that looks like the pattern of a tiger. You only see a little tiny piece of it, but you see just enough of it to go, that's probably a tiger, I better run. And so that image is anchored to the tiger, right? We always know that pattern means tiger. How that's evolved now into modern advertising is when a corporation creates a product or service, they want to have that product or service anchored in such a way that we have an emotional response to it, or we always think of it in a certain context. For instance, when we think of the Ford F-150 pickup truck, when the first time it's introduced to us, you see cowboys in it, driving across the desert, and there's hay in the back. And so the anchoring context is this is a work vehicle, right? It's rugged, it's tough, it's a manly thing. That's the anchoring image, right? Likewise, Starbucks, when it first came out, the idea was it was a cool, hip place to be, full of cool, hip people doing cool, hip stuff, drinking coffee, right? How do we know that? Because when we saw images of Starbucks, that's the context we saw it in. So how does that work for us as an actor? Well, we have our headshot, okay? And it's our general, we have 3 or 4 different shots, depending on how many we have for commercial work, theater, or whatever, 3/4 body. But they only have one kind of image. Hopefully it captures the essence of who you are. But let's say this, what you're seeing right now, let's say that's my headshot. But I'm going to go in and read for a cop, okay? So if I go into, or I make the submission, and they like my photograph, and they flip it over to the resume side, if in that lower right-hand corner, I have a photograph of me dressed as a cop from a previous job I did, suddenly they can see me immediately. I anchor them, their thought of me as the cop immediately. Why? Because I'm dressed as the cop. So you can actually influence the viewer by using a photograph in that lower right-hand corner that is as specific as possible toward the role you're reading. So if I'm reading for, like a soccer dad, like a suburban soccer dad. So if I've got a picture of me with a little tie-around sweater and a soccer ball from a job I've done, suddenly they can see me as the soccer dad. If I did a play by a Shakespeare play, perfect example. There I am with my big pumpkin pants and my sword and all that stuff. And I'm going in to read for another Shakespeare play. I might use that as an image to help influence the viewer so they can immediately see me in the role. So what I advise actors to do is to start a photo archive of their work. If you're doing plays or films, if you can get press shots of you, great. But at the very least, what I tell them to do is buy a little digital camera. Don't use your iPhone. Don't use your Android. Get a little digital camera, $40, right? You can buy them at Staples. Nothing. And then when you're in costume, surreptitiously, and that's the key watchword there, take a picture of you in costume, either on the set or on a neutral background, not behind the wardrobe rack and not with your arms around a bunch of friends. What you're doing is you're taking an archival photograph of you in that costume, as the soldier, as the nurse, as the cop, as the the young gentleman, as the lady with the parasol, from Hello Dolly or something. And then over time you'll build those up, and you can use those for your own marketing and advertising purposes, for postcards and so on. But if you're going in to read for something close to that role, you can then incorporate that photograph into the lower right-hand corner. And I always say, tell me what it's from. Like if I'm going to read for the cop, it might say, Sergeant Bencher in the District, because that was a role I played as a policeman. So that anchoring image is really important. Hopefully it'll be in color, by the way, which is one more reason why you want to print your resume out on nice bright white paper so the image will pop. And if you can, put a little black border around the photograph, and so it helps pop off the page, and make the picture large, 2 by 3, no smaller than 2 by 2. 2 by 3 is a good size. I've taught this principle to people, and sometimes they try to use it, and they send me their resume to look at, and their photograph is about the size of a Starburst candy. And I'm like, I can't, who are you? I can't even see you in the photograph. But by using that image, if it's the right image, you can influence the casting director or the director to call you in for the audition. And they can suddenly anchor you as that character. Now that's the first thing. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in for 1 second. I guess a couple of things that you do have to be careful of is that you want to make sure that the photograph looks really good.
Yes.
I would be concerned that if it's something that
Yes.
just doesn't look professional, it's going to leave a really bad impression.
Absolutely.
So if you
That's why I
do
say
have,
start with press shots if possible.
right.
And that's why I say use a digital camera, because it gives you more options with flash and focus, and when you're doing it, don't just take 1 or 2. Take 10, 15, 20 of these things, different poses. In my marketing class, when I first started making my own postcards and using this concept, when I was on set, I would hand off that camera and I would do 20, 30 pictures in different poses, different kinds of lighting, because I didn't quite know what I was going to use it for, but at least I had options. And you're right, it does need to have a nice look. It can't look crappy, that's for sure. And you said you had another concern.
Oh, the other concern is I know that sometimes, especially in the larger markets, and I don't know if this would have the same kind of effect. And maybe it wouldn't because it's on the back of a resume, but I do know that sometimes casting directors get really offended if you dress the part too much. And, if you're going in to read for a police officer and you actually get dressed up as a police officer and walk into the casting director's office. Right. Now, in some markets, that's a great idea, and I think it really, bangs people over the head so that they can see this guy looks like a cop. Right. And I was just going to say, I've also spoken with some casting directors who will say, look, I know what cops look like. I just want to see if you can act. So, don't wear something that's inappropriate, but I don't want to see a full uniform.
The difference here is, though, one is what you wear to the audition. I'm talking about what you make for the submission. Okay? So in other words, if I'm going to submit myself for the role of a cop in this indie movie, it's only the photograph. And the photograph is from a job I did. It's not like I went out and rented a uniform to take the picture. So that's why I say it's always good you always should credit the photograph. In other words, this is me playing this role in this project. Okay? I worked with an actress recently who was going in to read for the host of a new TV show. And she's done a number of them. So we found an archival photograph of her on set at the local ABC affiliate where she was working, and we just incorporated that. So you automatically see her in the context. So no, so go back to your policeman analogy. I have my headshot. The anchor image is on the back. Yeah, they know what a cop looks like, but you know what? It gives you. I'm telling you, it works. But when I walk in to read for it, you know what I would be wearing? I'd be wearing this, just a black shirt. I wouldn't have a badge and a gun and a baton and glasses. That's for the weekend. So, no, I mean, one is dressing too much for the role, and all I'm talking about is suggesting. And also one last thing about that, too, is, if you have an agent or a manager you're working with or a casting office, and they say, look, this is our form. This is the form we want your resume to look like, period. Go with their form. But when you walk into the audition, that's your time. In other words, if they demand a generalized resume that they keep on file with your agent does that or your manager, fine, make your agent happy. But when you walk in the room to audition, they're always going to ask you for another resume. And that's your moment to bring it in as a piece of advertising. And if you can augment your headshot with a picture of you that's very close to that character, and from another project, that just adds legitimacy to me. It just helps.
Yeah,
it helps anchor that.
And I guess it also shows these people that other people view you in the same way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you booked it.
And also say, like I said, take the photograph surreptitiously, meaning on the sly. You don't want to stop traffic for it. If you can get one on set, fine, but don't do it while they're shooting. And also, frankly, some projects you might be working on might have a no photo release policy.
Right.
That's your call. I've had people break that, but they've held the photograph until the movie or whatever was released, and then they use the photograph. That's your call. I won't tell you what you ought to do. But if you have a chance to play like in the new Star Wars movie on Disney, and you can hang on to that picture of yourself until after it's released, well, I'd think twice about it. But there's one more area that I want to talk about, and then before we start to wrap up, and that's in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, so if you recall, we've put all of your contact information in the upper left, a photograph, hopefully, of you in the lower right, and like I said, the samples that I'll include, they can see this very quickly. But in the upper right-hand corner, usually what I try to do is create a text box, and in that text box, I call it's sort of a little advertisement for what you're doing right now. You can either tell me what you've just done, what you're about to do, or some little bit of information that you think is really important. For instance, let's go through each one. let's say that I just did a national TV commercial for Geico, but it's just coming out this week. So I'm going into a general audition for whatever, to meet a new casting director or something. So I might say, put that in the text box, say, keep an eye on me for my national television commercial. Or let's say I'm doing a play and it's going to open that weekend and I'm coming in to audition at your theater. I might say, opening night is this Friday for the role of blah, blah, blah. So it's a little, here's what's about to happen for me. Or I just got cast in this role in this great movie. Something you don't even have as a credit yet. I'm gonna be playing opposite Tom Cruise in his new movie, blah, 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 shooting this fall here in DC. Another thing you might want to put in is something you've just finished. Like, I just finished my 10th audiobook, or I've just wrapped my first, the film I was in the 48-hour film festival in Pittsburgh just won an award for audience favorite. But you can also do things like in that little box saying, just shot new pictures with Joe Henson out of New York City, or putting the final touches on my video reel. Send you a DVD if you want one. So you can send them a little message in that text box in the upper right-hand corner. And the idea is that if you have something that's topical or interesting, you've actually given them the first question to ask you. Like, wow, how'd you get that role with Tom Cruise? Or what was it like to do? I did audiobooks. What's all that about? So it's like a little flashing advertisement about something that you're doing that's current or important that you don't have on the resume. It just might be something that's brand new for you, right? Or I've just started taking this acting class with this acting teacher.
And it's a good way to potentially start a conversation with having
absolutely.
them talk with you.
So I use those three things. And I usually, in the box up in the corner, I usually put a light color in so it just pops off the page. And so, like I said, the examples in my videos, you'll see how I incorporate all those things. But there is one thing I want to, when you watch the videos, and if you see the samples, there is one thing I want to leave the viewers with, is that there's a concept in graphics design called noise. And if there's too many things to look at on a page, too many colors, too many photographs, too many boxes, the page is called noisy. It reminds me of those Haight-Ashbury rock and roll posters from the late 60s that you couldn't read anything on because the text was so, everything was just, there was too much to look at. You couldn't read it. That's noisy, okay? You don't want to make your, and as far as using color and photographs, you don't want so many things on the resume that it looks like Walt Disney threw up on it, You want less is more. But if it's the right images, if you've highlighted the right information in red, it can really help the viewer take in the right information. Okay?
Great. Well, listen, I think this was really incredible. I think, maybe the very last thing before we close up shop for the day is just for people to understand that if you are someone who's just getting started and you really don't have that much in the way of credits, don't feel bad about it. Don't be concerned. And like you had said, Sean, I mean, look, we all have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Well, we all started at zero. Everybody starts at zero.
And the thing, too, is, your resume doesn't get you the booking either. I mean, the resume certainly will open doors depending on what you have, but it's going to be the audition itself. It's going to be your headshot that gets you the audition. It's, and so sometimes just the people that you studied with can be just as important as having a bunch of credits. So don't be concerned if you don't have a whole lot to put on there. Be honest with the resume, and certainly take Sean's advice, because his information is just incredible here of how to design it, put it together, make it effective, understand that it's going to be fluid, it's going to change.
I mean, that's the ultimate thing. It really does work. If I can just give one more example before we move on, is that, there was an actress that's worked with my wife. My wife directs the Maryland Shakespeare Festival's teenage company called the Riotous Youth. And we've had actors who come through there who are going on to acting school now. And so I help them craft a resume based on these principles. And these kids have a ton of experience doing Shakespeare. But I make sure we do the photograph and the little text box and so on. And the reaction, the story they tell me when they come back is, when I went into the audition at the school, they said, "This is amazing. We've never seen anything like this. Who taught you this?" You know, this, and because it gave them all the information they needed, but it took it one step further. You know, and so I always make the joke that when you look at pictures and resumes all day, it's like looking at a bowl of pennies. They all look the same after a while. And your job as an actor is to have a headshot and resume that is so good, so clear, that you become a nickel in a bowl of pennies. And if you're really good, a quarter, right? And so suddenly those college kids, those young kids going to school, they were 50-cent pieces. They were huge, you know. Nobody had a resume like that. And it works. I mean, that's the ultimate thing. It does work.
Hey, Sean, I just want to thank you so much again for this really incredible information. And for everybody, definitely check out Sean's new book, To Be or Wanna Be. The link to the book is right on this page. Also, he just has so much information on his YouTube channel. You could just spend days going through it. He's a very successful actor. He's been in the industry for a long time. He's very smart, and there's a lot to learn from him. He also offers, private sessions as well. So, anyhow, I just want to say thank you again. And are you ready to take some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, Joel, are you ready to start firing away with questions for us?
Let's get right into some questions. This is from John from Phoenix. And John asks the question, does the color or thickness of my resume matter?
Well, the paper itself, if you buy a nice bright white paper, like a 92-pound paper, has a nice feel for it. Yeah, I mean, not flimsy paper feels flimsy. This sort of goes back to advertising 101, that, you know, when you send out marketing and advertising materials, the quality of the material makes a statement in and of itself. So, like, for my own resume, I go to Staples and get their nice bright white inkjet paper. I think it's the 92 or 98 pound. That's the designation that tells you how thick it is. I don't like it any thicker than that because it can become a little stiff. As far as color goes, I know we didn't address it in the when we were talking just now, but I tell the story that there was one time I was going in for a huge cattle call audition, and on the morning of the audition, I realized I didn't have any white paper, not a scrap of it in my apartment, none. And so all I had was this pale blue paper, like a pastel. And I said, well, I've got to go with what I have. So I ran off the 50 or 60 copies, put them all together, went to the audition, gave them to the monitor. And when I walked out into the theater and I looked out into the audience, I saw all these tables where casting people and agents were, covered in white notes and stuff. But in the center of every single one of them was a blue resume. So I became a nickel in a bowl of pennies. So sometimes I advise people that if you don't have a photograph to work with as an anchor image, and if you want to do something that might still catch their eye, I would, you might want to go with a pastel colored paper, nothing too over the top. But that is one more way of getting noticed, because they can say, oh, where's that guy who had the blue resume? So,
Yeah, and the one thing I would just add to that, I mean, I think the key thing is just make sure that it's very readable. If it's something that is hard for somebody to very quickly look at and catch all the text in there, then it's probably not working. Because the key thing is make sure people can read it very easily.
Absolutely.
Guys, well, we've got a question, international question. William from Ireland. He asks, are resumes in the UK different than the ones you make in America?
Well, there's a joke there somewhere, but I just don't know what the punchline would be. I don't think so. I'm sure that there might be a slightly different norm. I've been I've only seen a few resumes from the UK and from Australia and even from Canada, and in general they all look the same because they all tend to follow that sort of, as at the beginning I said, that sort of business outline, which in effect is wrong, but it's what everybody does. I would just say, if you happen to see some, send them to me. You can send them to me via email at seanpratt@comcast.net, and I'll take a look at them. You can even send me yours if you'd like. But as far as I know, I think the general layout and order of them is about the same. Wouldn't you say so, Aaron?
Yeah, and the other thing that I would do, I would take our suggestions, put together your resume, and then show it to your agent or show it to a couple of agents in the area and see what they have to say. My guess, and I'm kind of like with you, Sean, I mean, I haven't really seen that many resumes from people in other countries. But I can't imagine that it's going to be very much different because people want to see what your skills are, and they want to see what you've done, and they want to see where you've studied. So I think pretty much all that information is going to be the same.
Doing classes online on the internet, we tend to get a lot of international students from Europe, Australia, even parts of Asia. So I appreciate you guys answering that. So this is from Susan from Portland. She asks, if I can only list theater jobs on my resume, will that keep me from being able to audition for film and TV?
Aaron, you want to start with this one?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. Absolutely not. I mean, if people can see that you've had experience, then, why wouldn't they want to bring you in for the audition? Now, one of the things that you do have to be careful of, and this has nothing to do with a resume workshop, but if all of your experience has been on stage, you just have to make sure that you understand there's a tremendous difference in the way that you're going to be auditioning for film or TV as opposed to auditioning or working on stage. But, it gives you credibility. It lets people know that people like your acting skills. And then it's just simply a matter of knowing how to make the transformation from stage to film and TV. But I can't imagine somebody not, at least considering you as long as you look right for the part.
Yeah, I have to say that I didn't audition for my first film until after I had done almost 30 plays. So, I had no film experience whatsoever. I was still in college, and I just went to the audition, and like I tell a lot of college students when they first get out, they're worried, well, all I have are high school and college credits. I don't have anything professional. And I say, that's okay. They're expecting that because you're 21 years old. And likewise, if your background's in theater, also, frankly, that actually can be biased in your favor. I know a lot of people, a lot of casting directors and directors who really like actors who have that kind of background, because if you've done a lot of theater, you know the amount of self-discipline and effort it takes to put up a project, as opposed to someone who maybe has taken just a few acting classes and wants to just jump into in front of the camera. So your theater experience is actually a bonus.
I would also just add in there, I think it depends on where you're living and where you're trying to work. I would think that in New York, those theater credits would be taken much more seriously and appreciated, more so than in LA. But like Sean was saying, look, the fact that you are getting cast, in these projects is saying a lot to the world. And, like I said, it's just a matter of learning how to make that transformation from theater to film and TV.
Guys, so Kara, Los Angeles, I kind of look like a high school student, but I'm actually 26. Should I list my date of birth and be honest on my resume?
Absolutely not. You are
resume
only
or don't list your date of birth.
No, don't. That's you are only as old as you look, both individually and in the context of how you're being cast. That show 90210 from back in the 90s or 80s. God, it's been so long. All those 18-year-olds were 27, and when I was 27, I still looked like I was 18. That's you're not. It's not that you're fooling somebody. You look what you look like is what you look like.
Hey, Sean, but just to kind of jump in there and take another side to that, here's another possible thought.
Sure.
When they're casting, for that project, and they need people who are, looking like they're high school students. Well, if they know that you are an adult, they don't have to deal with child labor laws. They don't have to deal with tutoring on the set.
Right.
And they can work you as long as they need to because there aren't time limitations. In that way, do you think it could be helpful to at least maybe say, I'm over 18? If you really look like a kid and you look like a high schooler and they're thinking, well, I'd like to bring her in. And then all of a sudden they find out, oh, she's an adult. Great. That's even better.
Well, yeah, I would say maybe you hit the nail on the head. I would say over 18 because like it or not, sometimes people can be biased by pieces of information. I know we talked about how the anchor image can bias, someone in your favor by seeing you in the part. If you give them your date of birth, they might go 27. Well, we just wanted to, we were looking for someone who was 26, and then suddenly you're out the door. Or we were, I know it's like in the voiceover world. I've literally been in the room where people have pulled out a demo to listen to a person for a possible radio job, and they go, yeah, she sounds good, but we really wanted a brunette for this part. I'm not kidding. That's a true story. And so to me, I think Aaron's comment's better. Is that if you want to just say over 18, that would be better. And if they really want to know your age, they'll ask.
Right, and I think that would be the only time you would put anything about age on a resume because, like Sean was saying, once you put a number down, even if you look right for the part, sometimes people just have these crazy ideas of, well, she's really too old, too young, or whatever it is. Let your picture sell your age, and don't worry about the numbers.
Yep.
Tara from Melbourne, Australia. Sean and Aaron, thanks for a great workshop. My question is, my headshot is horizontal. Should I match my resume to the photo or still keep it vertical?
Oh, that's an excellent question. No, you should go ahead and make it vertical like you would a normal resume. But think of, if you look at your photograph, okay, think of it as a check. When you flip a check over, if you endorse it on that left-hand side. Once you flip it over, that left-hand side becomes the top where the resume would be. So if you look at your horizontal headshot, you're going to put 2 staples on the left-hand side. That'll be at the top when you flip it over, and then 1 staple at the right-hand side in the center. So when you flip it over, it rotates itself. So the left-hand side becomes the top. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because if you try to follow the same format and created a horizontal resume, it's going to look kind of weird, and you're not going to be able to put as much information as you would probably like to.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like where you would endorse the check. That would be the top of your resume.
A few more questions coming in here. Let's see, this one, Neil from Orlando has a question. What exact criteria should I use to decide if I can list a sport as a special skill?
Aaron, you want to jump on that one?
Sure, yeah, I can get started with that one. Here's the deal, and I would say that this is true not only for sports, but whether it's speaking a foreign language, whether it's doing dialects, whether it's doing martial arts, whatever you're going to list on there. Look, you don't have to be a professional. You don't have to be an expert. But let's say, for instance, the point is you have to be proficient. So like, for instance, if you were cast, let's say you have basketball listed on your special skills section of your resume, and you get cast in a TV commercial or in a film or in a TV show, and they need people who can play basketball. Do you look like somebody who can really play basketball? I mean, have you played? And you don't, it's not like you have to have played at a college or professional level, but you've played enough so that you look like you know what you're doing, so that when somebody's watching you, they're not shaking their head and saying, well, what in the world is that guy doing? That doesn't look like a basketball player to me. This guy can't even dribble. So I think the key word is that you are proficient at whatever you do. And whatever you do, don't lie about it. And it's been, sometimes it's been hard for me. I've turned down, well, not that many, but I've turned down a couple of jobs because I really couldn't do the dialect that was being required for the particular role. And, there was a part of me that thought, well, maybe I could fake it. If you give me the lines, maybe I could work with somebody really quickly. But the point was, I knew that I wasn't great at it. I wouldn't sound like a native, which is what they needed. And instead of not only embarrassing myself and being very unprofessional, and also embarrassing my agent, because if I showed up for the job and I just couldn't pull it off, it's going to make the agent look bad as well. And the agent's going to get a phone call immediately. So as difficult as it is to turn things down, be honest with all of your special skills. And I know we talked earlier, about just being honest in general, but, specifically with your special skills, if you're not really good at it, you're not proficient, it's not something that, people would look at you and really believe that you're able to do those things, then don't list it. So I would say that being proficient is the key word.
Yeah, ditto.
Answer, Sean. Ditto. That was good. No, I'm just kidding.
A man of few words. That's me.
I'm just giving you a hard time, man. Okay, Linda from Fort Worth, Texas. I took acting classes at a modeling school. Should I list the name of the school or the instructor?
Sean, you want to take that one first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Where you take the class and who your instructors are is one more relevant data point. Eventually, if you take a lot of classes, then you're going to have to be judicious about which ones you put down just for space sake. But of course, like if you were at the Texas Theater Modeling Agency and Mary Smith was your teacher, well, you just may be auditioning for someone who knows her. I mean, it's always, those things can be very relevant.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've got a slightly different take on that. If let's say it's a strictly a modeling school that doesn't necessarily have the reputation for, teaching a lot of acting classes, then I'm wondering if maybe it would be better to, number one, list the type of class it is, and I would never just put, acting. Make it specific. Was this, acting for camera? Was this script analysis? Whatever the class was, make it very specific so people have a really clear understanding of what you studied. And then what I would probably do is, instead of listing the name, and once again, if it's a school that's really more known for modeling than for acting, I'd be concerned that listing the name of the school could be detrimental to you and you might not be taken as seriously. So in that case, I would list the instructor. And like Sean was saying, maybe it's a very good instructor and people will know who that person is. So I would list the name of the teacher, and that way, because, in the acting world, people still have real prejudices against models, which personally I think is really silly. I mean, that's why, and I know I'm kind of jumping topics a little bit, but it's on the same path. That's why, you don't want to bring a composite sheet, or a COM card or Z card to an audition, because people still think, oh, you're a model, you can't act. So I would, really make sure that to leave anything that has to do with modeling off of your acting resume, because people still have this misconception of models simply can't act. So anyhow, that's my take on it. List very specifically what you studied, and I would list the instructor. But if it is a modeling school and that's what it's known for, then I think it might be better to leave the name of the school off.
Another modeling question. We've got Tammy Reese asks, I have done some print work and will soon become a fit model. Is it okay to add modeling work on your resume?
Here's my take on putting down any kind of modeling information on your resume. You know, the thing is, people still have these thoughts of you're a model and you can't act. So as difficult as it is not to list some of your jobs, because you want to show people that you are working in the industry, whether it's a commercial modeling job, a fitness job, I know you want to put that on your resume, but I think it will actually do you more harm than good. And I think it's better to leave anything that has to do with whether it's modeling, whether it has to do with pageant work, because sometimes people like to list those kinds of things to show they've had experience on stage, they can talk to people, they can talk to large groups, they have to show talent for certain things. Having said all that, still, I would leave anything that has to do with modeling or anything outside of the acting world off of your resume.
So just to recap, I've always kept my the years when I was a Chippendales dancer in Vegas on my resume, so I'm going to take that off now. I was Sean the Magic Leprechaun, and so obviously I've been making a huge faux pas. Thank you for that, Aaron.
You're very welcome.
It's time to move on. No, I'm just kidding. I have to go erase that image out of my mind. Aaron, quick question came up from me, and we got a couple more probably about a few more questions here to answer. I just wanted you to answer one thing, Aaron. Do models have resumes? I mean, is this something you would have a separate resume in your modeling world? Just for some of the models that might be tuning in, that might be something just to spend like 30 seconds to a minute on.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that I hear about quite often. People will say, well, how do I put together my modeling resume? What kinds of information should I put on my modeling resume? And actually, it's pretty easy. There is no such thing as a modeling resume. I've never seen a modeling resume. Now, if there is anything in the fashion world, and I'm not familiar with that at all. I haven't even seen it in the fashion world, but I can tell you in the commercial modeling world, the thing is people really don't care. The photographers, the art and creative directors at advertising agencies or the agents, they really don't care how many jobs you've done, whether it's 0 or 10,000. What they are concerned with is, what do your photos look like? That is what's going to get you work, not what your experience has been, because they need very specific looks, they need different reactions, they need different emotions and expressions in your photographs. That's what's important to them, not any kind of resume. So anyhow, the answer is no. There is no such thing as a modeling resume. There is, by the way, something about putting your stats, and there is some information you will put on your composite sheet or Z card or comp card. And those are things, it's going to be your sizes. So if they have to go out and get wardrobe for you, and actually even sometimes special skills, or if you have good hands, good legs, good feet, you're going to put those things on your comp card. But there's nothing like an acting resume for models.
I appreciate you clarifying that for us. So let's go into feature film talk here. Jeremy's got a question. How can I get film credits if there are no major films being shot in my area? And I think Jeremy, it looks like he's from Wichita. I'm guessing that's Kansas. So I guess it's a smaller market.
Well, you should be looking into something called the 48-Hour Film Project. This is really, because it's really exploding across the country. That's the first thing that comes to mind. If you go to 48 Hour Festival, I think it's the number 4, the number 8 Hour Festival. The idea is local filmmakers in different cities across the country, they do a number of them. They get together and they produce a film in 48 hours. They get a scenario, a line of dialogue, and a character, and so on. They line up the actors they're going to be working with. They shoot the film. They edit the film and get it all back to the people running the project in 48 hours or 72 sometimes. But I know for a fact, like, there's one in Dallas, there's one in Oklahoma City. I think there's one in Kansas City too. Those pop to mind. The other, and the other piece of this also is sometimes you got to go where the water is. So if you're looking for more work in film and television, or just movies in general, you may have to relocate to a larger market to find that work.
Yeah, and and the other thing too, I mean, that program is pretty amazing. But the other thing you might want to check out is contacting all of the community colleges, all the universities, all of the colleges in your area, because there's a very good chance that they have a film department. If they have a film department, these students, they have to be able to shoot film. Well, not for every class, but for some of the classes, they have to shoot films, and they are going to need actors to be in these films. So without a doubt, you want to contact the instructor. If assuming you have a headshot, bring it and speak to them, and find out when there are auditions, what the different, films are going to be about. And you might have access to tons of filmmakers, people who need to shoot films not only for their classes, but these are people, these are students who might want to go on and start shooting larger projects. And there are a lot of well-known actors that have made connections through fellow students who've gone on to direct, large independent films, feature films. So I would also use all of your contacts and try to get into student films, which is a great way to also not only build up your resume, but to start building up your acting reel as well.
Ditto.
Oh, and the other thing, excuse me, just to kind of jump in there, and I don't know if there is an organization in your particular area, but there is an organization called Women in Film, and you can find them online. I believe it's WIFV.org, but just type in Women in Film, and they have locations actually literally around the world, and you don't have to be a woman to be a member. I'm a member, and I've given workshops there, and I go to meetings when I can, and they have network meetings, and you can network with other people who are in the in the industry. Not everybody is a filmmaker, but you will find some filmmakers there, and you might even want to try contacting your film commission in your particular area, because if there are films coming to town, and I know this is a little bit of a long-winded way of doing this, but if there are films coming to town, maybe you can do some extra work. And if you're doing extra work, you might be sitting in a room with a ton of other people, and some of those people might be either interested in shooting films, maybe they know people who are shooting films, they can tell you about some independent films that are being done, but anything that you can do to connect yourself with other industry people can only help you.
We have a question from Orlando. Judy says, will an agent even consider working with me if I don't have much listed on my resume? I only have 2 things, and one is a community play.
Well, it always,
John.
Yeah, like I've said before, is that you and myself and Aaron and Meryl Streep and Denzel Washington all have something in common, which is when we started out, we had 0 credits.
Oh, I thought you were going to say we were all great.
We're actually,
I'm a little disappointed there, Sean.
We were all Chippendales dancers, but that's a different story. No, seriously, the thing you have to remember too is that, especially for beginning actors, when you're just getting into the business, you've been hearing for a long time, I'm sure, that you've got to have an agent. You got to have an agent. Well, eventually you'll want to have one to hopefully open bigger doors for you, but you're also just looking to find work. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of work in your area that doesn't require an agent. It requires you to submit yourself to that particular theater, or to use Facebook or the local networking websites in your area to look for auditions. I was actually going to build up on what Aaron was just talking about finding film work. If you go onto Facebook, it's a lot more than just, hey, here's a picture of my lunch, or my dog playing with a kitten. If you type in, in your particular city, if it was like actor groups in fill in the blank, right? You're going to get some, whether it's New Orleans or St. Petersburg or Portland, there are actor groups there. And then you can use that to help network yourself and find out who's producing what. and find some more experience for your resume. Yeah, like it or not, an agent's, unless you are an amazing, amazing talent who comes in with a wonderful audition, an agent is probably not going to be that interested in with someone who only has 2 credits. I mean, they are ultimately looking for someone who will book the job and make them money as well. So, I would say take the pressure off yourself maybe and look for just getting some more work on that resume.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
The other thing, and I think this also will be helpful, there are also some incredible Yahoo groups, and
Yes.
you can do a search on Yahoo. There are
Yes.
lots of acting groups and modeling groups as well on Yahoo. So just do a search there. But the key thing is, and I know we do place a real importance on resumes, and they are very important. But let me just tell you, it's not the most important part. The number one thing is, even before your skills are discussed, it's going to be your look. And if you have a look that people think is going to be marketable, that's the first step. And it's hard to imagine somebody not having some kind of look where they couldn't portray and play some kind of character. But I think you might find that agents, if they like your look and they look at your resume and they say, well, she really hasn't done a whole lot, a little bit of theater. My thought is, why wouldn't they want to bring you in and maybe even say to you, look, I think you've got a great look here. I see you really don't have much experience. Here's some local classes that we think will be very helpful to you, and check them out. Here are a bunch of them. Here's some teachers that we've sent people to in the area, and interview them. I mean, if I were an agent, that's the way I'd want to run my business, and to close the door on somebody. Even if you're older and you're not, just a young kid with no experience, even if you're older and you've, retired and, you haven't done a whole lot in the industry. But if I think, and I'm not trying to say this in a really cold way, but look, agents are there to make money. And if I were an agent and you walked into my office and I thought, you know what? She doesn't have a whole lot of experience, but man, she's got a great look. I think I can make money with this person if they have the skills. Then I would say absolutely. I'd want to work with somebody, or potentially work with somebody, as long as I know that they are going to be able to do a decent job, at the audition, not embarrass themselves, not embarrass me, things like that. So, yeah, of course, if you've got an amazing resume, it's going to open up doors. It's going to be easier for you to find an agent. But I would also say, even without a very powerful resume, I think that you still can be considered, by a lot of agents in the area. Maybe it will be a smaller agency. Maybe it's not the biggest agency in the area that has all the top tier actors who've, done lots of film and television and, commercials. Maybe it's a smaller agency, somebody who's kind of, just getting started. Maybe somebody who works with people who aren't as experienced. And that's all it's going to take. Sometimes the smaller agencies can be much, much better for you and more effective than the bigger agencies.
So,
do I hear a ditto in there?
Ditto, boss.
Okay.
Fantastic. Here's what I want to do, guys. We're kind of wrapping up here with the questions and answers. I've got about 2 more questions I want to ask you both. And then, Aaron, I'm going to let you kind of wrap up your end, and then I want to say a few things to close us out about where they can find information about from you and Sean and some stuff like that as we close out. So let's do these 2 questions here, and then, Aaron, I'm going to have you just talk for maybe 2 minutes, and then I'll close us out if that's doable for you guys.
Sure, sounds good.
Yeah.
So this is from Kimberly from Palmdale. How often should I update my resume?
Well, this gets back to the whole concept of the master resume. If you create that master resume first and you leave that, on your computer, you're constantly updating it because you're constantly you're tweaking a resume, changing it slightly for every audition you're going to. So it's a constant process. So, build the master resume first, that's got everything you've ever done, all your classes, your training, your special skills, contact, all that stuff. And so when you get, if you're going to, on this next Monday, let's say you have a theater audition, then you look at the role, you look at the play, you look at their season, and then you cut and paste the relevant information to build that theater resume for that audition. And let's say a week later, you have a chance to read for a part for a TV show. Well, then, once again, you start from scratch. You look at what is the part, who am I auditioning for, what's the show like, and then you cut and paste the relevant information into a new resume. So the idea is that the resume is not set in stone. Yeah, it requires a little more work on your part, but remember, you're trying to give them the right information that ultimately says that you're the specific solution to their specific problem.
You know, it's so funny that you asked that question, because Sean and I were talking recently about the fact that I just updated my resume twice in the past, I don't know, like 3 weeks. And the reason why I did that, and I guess this kind of goes along with your question as well, is you also want to update and change your resume when you've got better things to put on there.
Yeah.
And so I just was cast and shot in a feature film, and also just did an independent film, and it was all like within maybe like 2 weeks. And I thought, you know what, this is good stuff to put on the resume. It was a role that I hadn't done before. I was playing a priest, and so I thought, you know what, that's going to be helpful for me to have on there. Plus the fact that the director is a pretty well-known director. So, you know, I would say, you know, along with what, you know, Sean is saying, also when you've got better things and more impressive things and things that show a wider range for you, and then you can start cutting out some of the things that aren't as important. So that would be another reason to update your resume.
All right, so final question here. This comes from Sarah from Santa Monica. Is there a difference between a resume for Los Angeles and New York? And do I need to make a different style?
Want to go take that one first, Sean?
Well, I would say my general answer would be that a resume is a resume because it's ultimately just highlighting your performance, your experience, and so on. But that said, just as there is a different headshot style from New York to LA to Chicago to Dallas, each town might have certain kinds of classes that they want to see, or certain kind of experiences they want to see for Los Angeles as opposed to New York or somewhere else. But you know, this once again, it gets back to the central idea that your resume is a piece of advertising. So if you think about the people who are going to read it, what will they be interested in? What's going to catch their eye with the information that you have? The other way to follow up on that question too is, you know, perhaps look at other actors' resumes. Do they have a category in there or a section that you didn't place, or maybe we didn't talk about today? You know, don't be afraid to sort of, you know, do a little investigative work on your own. But my general answer would be that no, a resume is a resume.
And you know, Sean, you brought up a really interesting point, and this also goes to something you had said earlier this evening. You know, when you're listing education, you know, somebody who might be a very well-known acting teacher in LA might be unheard of in New York. And so I think when you were talking about some of the differences between LA and New York, absolutely, you know, if you know, depending on who you study with, could have a lot more importance in either one of those cities. I would think that the one key difference could be that if you are trying to break into the LA market, I really don't think that they're going to value theater experiences nearly as much as in New York, just because there's so much more theater happening in New York. So if you were going to try to work in LA and you do have a bunch of theater experience, I probably wouldn't highlight it nearly as much as I would if you were trying to work in New York.
Yeah, because it's Aaron's spot on here. I mean, I've a lot of my friends who've gone to LA who have a lot of theater backgrounds. They say that, you know, theater is sort of like the ugly redheaded stepchild of the performance industry in LA, but having some on the resume once again does show that you've been cast, you're working, but you obviously your film, television, any kind of camera work would go to the top of the resume because that's the most important thing they're looking at, and that would be just the reverse in New York. If you have a lot of film and TV credits, or working in front of the camera, that's fine. But in New York, if you're going in to read for agencies that deal with regional theaters and Broadway and off-Broadway, they need to see your theater experience at the top of the resume. So sometimes it's a matter of layout too.
And I think the other thing that's always really helpful is if there's an agent, that you're sitting down with, that you're interested in working with, it would certainly be a very legitimate question to ask to look at headshots and resumes of some of the actors whose work they really respect.
Absolutely.
And in that way you can take a look at it and compare it and see, are they doing anything differently? And also always feel free to ask the agent, if you're sitting down with them, to look at your resume. And is there anything, that they would recommend changing? Now, also just keep in mind, there aren't any real specific things that absolutely have to be in a resume. There are some, but they can vary slightly, and every agent might have a different thought as to what they're looking for. So I think it's always okay to get a few second opinions, and then you decide. But I think what you will, what you should be doing though is going then in there with a very, very solid looking resume, and then see if they want you to make any adjustments that are, more pertinent and more desirable for that particular agent.
Aaron, if you want to say a few words, and then I'll close this out.
Okay, fantastic. I just wanted to say, first of all, Sean, thank you so much for being a part of this workshop. It was great. And for everybody, just make sure you check out his new book. I know we're going to have all the, the website there. Joel's going to mention something about it. And, for everybody, just understand this is a work in progress. It's not something that you're going to necessarily be able to do overnight. And these things, they're fluid. They change. And that's one of the nice things. So if your resume is not solid, filled with all these amazing things, don't worry about it. Start off slowly. It's not it's not a sprint here. It's a marathon. And so take your time and put on the resume what you can, and just be very honest with it. And just want to wish everybody the best of luck. And as always, if you guys have any questions at all, you can always email me. It's Aaron, Aaron, at howtomodel.com. And this was fun. Thank you so much for being a part of the workshop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Well, guys, thanks so much. And Sean, thank you. If you'd like to find out more about Sean Pratt and everything he has to offer, obviously he's got a brand new book out right now. It's called To Be or Wannabe, To Be or Wannabe, WANNA. And you can find that at tobeorwannabe.com. You can also find out more about Sean and all the different things that he offers and the different trainings and resources he has at Sean Pratt Presents. That's Sean, SEAN PRATT presents.com. So you can find out all that stuff at Sean. And Sean, we were so glad to have you part of the program today, and we're really excited that you were here with us. If you'd like to leave a Facebook comment on Facebook, the How to Model Facebook page, it's facebook.com/howtomodel, and feel free to leave a comment there. If you leave a comment, if you could be specific about something you learned today, something that was really impactful for you today, a nugget of truth or an insight or something you're going to change about your resume, your acting career, your modeling career, whatever it is, leave a comment there, and we'll give you a free gift. It's going to be a simple gift, but just for leaving a comment on our Facebook page, we'll go ahead and give you a gift, a link, and share that with you if you be so kind to go over to Facebook and do that. Again, that's facebook.com/howtomodel. Aaron also offers private coaching. If you are interested in really ratcheting up your career and taking it to the next level, and you would like to work one-on-one with Aaron, email him at aaron@howtomodel.com, and he's willing to work with anyone one-on-one. He's got a few spots open this month. If you have a chance to get in, that would be great. Otherwise, you'd have to wait till another month to be able to book some sessions. But he's always got that available to work with you, where you get on a Skype call or a phone call. He'll look at some of your materials. He'll look at your resumes, your headshots, things like that, and walk you through the process of really setting yourself up for success in a one-on-one format, which has been really powerful for a lot of people. So go ahead and email him. Again, it's aaron@howtomodel.com. Also, watch your inbox and watch the website, howtomodel.com, for our next workshop coming up next month. We've got a ton more workshops planned. We seem to be doing these once a month now. We're on a roll. We've got several already recorded, so if you're brand new to the How to Model family and you'd like to go check out some of those resources, obviously you can check out all of that information at howtomodel.com, and you can find out all the different workshops we've already recorded, the ones that are coming up and getting ready to broadcast. We've got some on voiceover, commercial modeling, understanding unions, or just some of the ones coming up really soon in the next few months. If you want to get all the workshops at one discounted and easy price point, we wanted you to check out our Season Pass program. You can find out that information also on howtomodel.com. The Season Pass gets you access to all of those workshops, and it's a really convenient and lower price way to get all of the great training. So, again, howtomodel.com. If you'd want to check out more about Sean Pratt, go to SeanPrattPresents.com, and we will see everybody soon. Aaron and Sean, thank you guys so much for a great workshop. This was fantastic. I learned a ton. I'm sure our audience did as well. And you guys have a great day, and thank you so much.